So thanks for coming, by the way.
It's very nice doing it in person because I've done a few down the wire and it's just not the same.
No, I do think it's funny. I've done them down the wire as well, and when I do, I always say let's not see each other because because I imagine then I'm only hearing, and that's the experience of someone else recording it, and I'd imagine it's more like audio rather than when you're looking at people's faces picking up things. I don't know whether it makes it better, but it's certainly much better being one-to-one.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, and I get that listening back to some of the ones you've done. There's a nice, there's an unusual depth to it, which is good.
Well, there's an interesting thing, which I don't know whether complete coincidence, but the ones that have been the most candid have been in the smaller studio.
Really?
Yeah.
Neat.
So the Frank one low one you were mentioning, we were almost nose to nose. It was in a one-man booth because he wanted to come in the middle of the day. And I don't know whether, again, that feeds in because you're literally uncomfortably close. It's sort of, I don't know. But anyway, so, I've kind of been reviewing just to refresh myself because obviously we sort of worked together a bit over the years. And I've been aware of you for a long time. But even in reviewing it, I'd sort of forgotten some very major, impressive things that that I was confronted with, going over it again. But before we sort of get into the work thing, I was going to ask you a couple of questions on where you come from.
Sure.
One is Derbyshire.
Yes.
And I was going to ask whereabouts because my wife's from Derbyshire.
Oh, okay.
And she'll want me to know.
All right, yeah. North, on the way to Belper and Matlock.
Oh, okay, that's near.
So quite north.
Well, my wife is from Brackenfield, which is near Alfreton.
Oh,
I don't know whether those words mean anything. They don't mean much to me.
Yeah.
And what were you like as a child? Creative? Could you draw? Presumably you could draw.
Yeah, I was the kid that drew everyone's other. I drew everything for everyone.
Did you?
At school, yeah. Yeah, I have memories. I have memories of drawing other people's aeroplanes at primary school. Michael,
really?
Can you draw an aeroplane for me?
So slightly obsessive, or not?
I don't know about that, but I wonder whether that was an early experience of being a commercial artist. You know, when someone comes over at primary school and says, "I can't draw an airplane, Michael. Can you draw one? Because you can draw."
And that was what their homework, or that was
I don't know. I can't actually, but I do remember having this request to draw an airplane.
But
yeah, sure, I can do that.
You didn't take any money for that.
No, not at the time.
That hustling gene hadn't kicked in yet.
Yeah, and when I got to secondary school, I was the kid that did everyone's band posters and was designing, parents' stationery. And
really, you were doing it at that early stage.
Yeah. And when I look back at some of this stuff, it's the triggers, the flags, the signals are pretty significant. I was designing typefaces at 14, 15.
Were you?
Yeah, and I was raiding my woodwork teacher's design magazines from the age of 12. I don't know if you remember the Design Council used to have that magazine just called Design.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had some on his cupboard, on his shelf, but he didn't actually because I had all of them and I just borrowed them all constantly.
This is when you were 12?
Yes.
So that's quite unusual.
Yes.
So bizarrely, because we're literally almost exactly the same age, bar a month, I can say that is unusual. So I'm doing the maths, in 1976.
Yes. Yeah.
Obviously, designing letterheads wasn't as easy as it was now.
No, it was a nightmare, yeah.
So how the hell would you go about designing a letterhead as a 12-year-old, 14-year-old in 1976?
You were struggling with Letraset and shit
Is
like
that so
that.
You did it with Letraset?
Yeah, there was no other way to do it, yeah. In a grammar that became a comp in North Derbyshire. Yeah, it was weird. Yeah, when I think back and look back at this, yeah.
And have you seen the results recently
of
the letterheads or any of that early work?
No,
I thought you were going to just say, and I was looking at one recently, and it was fantastic.
Oh no, gosh, no. I mean, I do know some designers. One famous American designer has got everything back to school, and that's
who's
really. Well, it's another Michael, and and he works at Pentagram, New York.
Okay, I know who that is. Yeah.
And he's got everything. In fact, he starts speeches with his classroom work.
Right.
And I'm not quite that guy. No, I do. I kind of wish I did have some of it actually. I still have some college work, but I think I had a purge.
So, what had you seen that made you think I'll start doing that? Because that would have seemed a leap. I would have thought at that feels like a very professional, skilled thing
I
to
don't
do.
know. I'm not sure. I was always into. I was also very into. I think I was very influenced by the. This is really showing my age. I was really influenced by the Sunday Times magazine.
Yeah.
Sunday Times magazine was a massive revelation to me at the time. As you know, those layouts from the 70s
Yeah.
were, whether it were the articles or the adverts, were pretty seminal. And I was watching the TV, obviously, only 3 channels or 2 channels even maybe at one point. But all of that, I was soaking all of that in, yeah. And that was all. And I had a pretty forward-thinking, technically woodwork teacher, and he would introduce little design modules into the lessons, and I ended up doing art, and I did design A-level, which is quite unusual then, and things like that. So I was into it from an early age. My mum was a painter. My dad was a teacher. My mum was a painter. So I think that I was always had access to pens and pencils.
To creative stuff like that.
Stuff. So that's probably fairly common in your conversations, I imagine, where people have access to, or
Yeah.
It's like when you have kids, isn't it? If you give them pens and pencils and encourage them to draw, then they can become good drawers. It's that thing that gets knocked out of people at school, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a bit shit, or that's not.
Yeah.
That's a terrible drawing.
Yeah.
So
often people aren't encouraged.
So, but I was always into that kind of thing. Although there was quite a lot of, what should we say, family pressure to avoid being a commercial artist. My mum was a commercial artist.
Yeah, it's funny that's what they used to be called. And obviously that term has vanished.
It
But
has,
that was when I was growing up. It's perhaps I could draw a bit. Perhaps you should be a commercial artist because you can draw. I don't know when that swapped for a graphic designer.
I think
why did that drop off?
I think the switch came in about the 60s. I mean, she was a commercial artist in the 50s.
Your mum?
Worked at an ad agency in Sheffield.
Oh, okay.
Main account was Spear and Jackson.
Right.
She drew spades.
Okay.
And I think that left a kind of a scar, and she was pretty determined that I wouldn't do that.
Right. So she hadn't enjoyed that.
No, she hadn't. No.
So she must have been horrified when, as a 12-year-old, you're designing letterheads and getting into that stuff.
I don't know. I'm not quite sure, really. Thinking back, I mean, like I say, the red flags were all over the place. And what I really should have done is, been sent to a decent design school, and gone done foundation and all the things that normally happen. But I didn't. I wasn't. I kind of went in all sorts of. I went and studied art and marketing and things like that. So mine was not a normal journey.
So do you remember the first designer you became aware of, named designer? So I can tell you mine.
Okay.
I'll tell you mine, which is the only one I can remember. So I did art. I studied art and design as well.
Yeah.
Because I think, for whatever reason, and in the design course, I remember so clearly that it was all fiddly little jam jar. I don't want to knock Michael Peters, but it was all fiddly little Michael Peters type things.
Yeah.
Nothing against him; he's done some lovely stuff. But it wasn't really. It felt like hard work to me.
Yeah.
And then one day, the teacher said, "Oh, we're going to show you this guy's work. He's a bit weird. He's not interested in kerning and fonts and things. Like he's a bit nutty." And they showed Bob Gill's work.
Right.
But as a bit of a freak.
Sorry, where was this, at school?
This was at college.
Oh, college.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
But he was sort of presented as a bit of a freak, a bit of light relief until we get on the proper stuff. It was so dismissive. And of course, I thought, God, this is fantastic. And I can remember seeing stuff. Now, it was just very visceral, simple, funny stuff. I thought, God, I love this, rather than getting all bogged down, whether it's Garamond at this point and the spacing felt like such hard work.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, and I could say that's probably the first designer that I remember seeing or being introduced to.
Well,
Do you remember?
I think in my case, I'd what's the word? By osmosis, I'd seen some of the great 70s advertising. The Benson Hedges ads, all the stuff that was in the Sunday Times, basically.
Yeah.
The Benson Hedges ads, all of that stuff, which I loved and couldn't quite believe what I was looking at. That kind of, which tapped into that whole schoolboy surrealism thing.
Yeah.
Loved all of that. But I don't think I could name a designer until equally I got to college. Now, I went to a university and they had a very small design department, tiny, and even smaller design section in the library. And there were only really 3 books on graphic design. One was by April Greiman, weirdly, amazing kind of postmodern California designer. I always loved her work. And Bob Gill.
Yep.
Forget All the Rules was in the library.
Is that the waste bin cover?
And what else? There was something. Herbert Spencer's Pioneers of Modern Typography, which I completely devoured.
Yeah.
So having sort of, I guess I trained myself through art direction in a weird kind of way because of the stuff I saw and all these design council magazines, which were tended to be about, how to design a Swiss railway, and all that kind of weird product design thing. And then I go to college and I find Bob Gill and I find April Greiman, very weird influences, and Herbert Spencer, this classic and seminal book. And I was at college like you at the time when, The Face was basically
was everything.
Pretty much learned graphic design from reading The Face.
Neville Brody.
Neville Brody's in glory days, really. And so that combination, and a book on Milton Glaser.
Right.
So that's a very weird.
It's quite an eclectic 5 designers to pull together.
Very eclectic and weird mix of stuff. Yeah, and really strange and
But you sort of liked all those almost equally. They were all food and drink.
Yeah, and tried to channel some of that into the stuff I did in my 20s, with varying degrees of success.
So in terms of advertising, because you're one of the few, if only, designers I can think of who kind of does advertising too.
Yeah.
Which makes more... Did you consider going into that?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Did you ever visit any agencies? Or?
Yeah, I studied art and marketing and had half a portfolio. So I didn't do foundation. Came to London and wrote letters to everyone. Wrote letters to ad agencies, actually. Thought I was going to be a planner.
Did you?
Yeah. Got a whole series of rejection letters. Had an interview with, what's his name? Leslie Butterfield?
Yeah.
At AMV, I think.
Yeah.
And he said, "You're not a planner." I went, "Yes, I am." He said, "No, you're not a planner." So he obviously just twigged straight away that I wasn't a planner. And I just got funny. I've forgotten about that. Completely forgotten about that.
Why on earth did you think you would be a planner with all your design?
I don't know.
Interest
I think because
and background.
I'd done half. I did a double.
Oh, you'd done
degree.
some,
I got a whole degree in marketing. Yeah, so I knew all of this gobbledygook, and I'd sort of trained myself. Well, semi-trained myself to be a graphic designer with these 3 books and lots of copies of The Face, which is a really weird way to become a designer. Anyway, and I couldn't quite get a foot in the door. Eventually, I got a job at Wolf Ernest. But actually, to answer your question, I did once work in advertising in Australia. Yes.
Yeah.
I worked with Simon Reynolds at what was called Omon at the time. That was quite a well thought of agency, I remember. Anyway, I have technically worked in advertising.
But,
yeah, briefly.
I mean, we'll get to that a little bit later. But I suppose one of my questions with that is why advertising and design are different disciplines, because they seem so similar to me. And obviously, when you go through your work, you can kind of flip from one to the other, and they're the same.
I've never really differentiated the two. I've never split the two, and obviously, graphic designers tend to, and ad men do, and women, obviously. I've never seen the difference, actually. I think it's because I see words and pictures as equally valid. Yeah, and most graphic designers are very fixated on the visual.
Yeah,
and most copywriters are fixated on the verbal. And for a long time, most of advertising was kind of dominated by the copywriter, wasn't it? And so I've always loved that interplay between word and picture. And I must admit that in the first few years, maybe in the first decade of my design career, people would kind of look at me. You could sort of thinking, why is he messing about with the words?
Yeah.
The
words are changing the words.
Yeah, the words are just the grey bit.
Yeah. It's the grey bit come to life.
Yeah, the grey bit between the pictures, someone said to me. And I said, no, the grey bit is really useful, because the grey bit with the picture makes it twice. And I did feel that I was kind of bashing my head against a brick wall sometimes.
Because I noticed in a lot of your early work, you're credited as a copywriter as well as a designer.
Yes. Yeah, and I still write all the time. Yeah.
It just seems so strange that this is something Michael Wolff was talking about. Why that the designers don't pay more attention to the words is an unusual thing. Because obviously, but ironically, Bob Gill, who we've mentioned, did pay a lot of attention
great writer.
to both things.
Yeah, I suspect it happens at school. I suspect that if you're good at English and history and writing essays, you go a particular direction.
Get divided off into one section.
And the incidence, as you probably know, of dyslexia and slightly spectrumy people tend to be pushed over to art and design.
Yeah.
And so you tend to get, and over the years, I've had I can count on hundreds of times I've had designers. Well, I haven't had 100 designers, but gosh, I couldn't count how many designers have been either slightly spectrum and or dyslexic.
Would you say you're in that camp?
I'm definitely not dyslexic.
Right.
I think I'm a bit spectrumy.
I'd say I'm spectrumy dyslexic. Yeah.
No, I'm not dyslexic, but I've had tons of dyslexic designers. Yeah. So I guess the point is that you're pushed that way at school and you end up being visually orientated, great.
Yeah.
And you end up getting into graphic design, fine. And I think that's where the split comes. And I do know that I am a strange mixture, of word and picture.
But you would have thought if you were running, Pentagram or something, you would think, let's get some really great people who are great at words, because it's not really our thing.
Yes.
From wherever. And I'm sure they do get, some,
Naresh.
but not...
Naresh, of course.
Yeah.
It was their first writing partner in London. Although he's left now, hasn't he?
Has he left? I don't
think
know.
He has,
but,
or leaving.
But given how many designers and what they do, you'd think they could afford even two writers. I don't know.
Well, funnily enough,
excellent.
People do ask me about the writing thing a lot. It's clearly a point of difference.
Yeah.
And I guess being honest about it. And it's only now that you're getting design companies, 30 years after I started my company, now that you're getting design companies employing copywriters directly.
Yeah.
And it's only really in the last 3 or 4 years that I've even become aware of that. And I'd been doing it for 26 years prior to that. So, I mean, that's kind of interesting in a way. And all the things I always took for granted, like the words I would use and how to, quote, position an organisation or a brand, and the words you use, the messages you use, how you'd write.
Yeah.
Now you hear that all the time. Yeah, tone of voice, messaging, positioning. This has all become the lingua franca of your modern branding agency. But I kind of been doing that. It sounds really big-headed. I don't mean it like that.
No,
I've been doing it innately
for
30 years.
Yeah.
And I don't quite know why. It just seemed
more
logical,
people haven't
really.
done it.
Yeah, it's weird that more people didn't do it. People are caught up now, to be fair.
Well, I think it's interesting. The keeping the writers away from designers is probably partly why they're seen as such different disciplines.
Yes. Well, there never were writers. That's my point. When I started at Wolff Olins,
there wasn't any writers.
There were no writers. There was a floor of MBAs.
Yeah.
Who were doing all the strategy.
Yeah.
And there was 2 floors of design. No, there was a floor of designers, a floor of art workers, and a floor of secretaries.
Yeah.
When I started at Wolff Olins, and that's how it all divided, and none of them were copywriters.
It's funny, isn't it? Because the amount of output that would have been words, the amount of words they would have need to generate and output.
Well, the MBAs, of course, thought they could all write.
I suppose so. Yeah.
They could write long form.
Yeah.
They could write you 1,000 words
in one tone.
But if you said to them, write it in 30, they'd be completely lost. Yeah.
So how was Wolff Olins? That was your first job in.
That was my first job.
First job.
Yeah, I couldn't get a job.
Any Saturday jobs before that?
Yes, I had a paper round. I got fired.
Did you? I had a few of those.
Yeah, no, I think I tried to organise a kind of union, and he fired me.
Did you?
Yeah.
Troublemaker from early on.
Yeah.
So Wolff Olins, what was that like? So that would have been post Michael.
It was just post Michael. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Michael Wolff. Yeah.
Yeah.
For those wondering who we're talking about. Yeah, I couldn't get a job. I wrote to Wally, who had marked a project that I'd done at college, remarkably, tore it to shreds.
Yeah.
Wally Olins, sorry.
Yeah.
And he very kindly saw me, and with 3 theatre posters and some mumbo jumbo about marketing in my head, and I heard this hilarious conversation in the corridor outside between him and his creative director. And he's going, and then Wally spoke in this very plumpy voice, I think we should give this chap a chance, And the creative director, who'd looked at my work, said, yeah, but his work's terrible. And they're having a conversation in the corridor
that you could
hear. I could hear, and I'm thinking, oh, shit, this is terrible. this is awful. And then Wally goes, I really think we should give him a go. He did actually talk like that. You know?
And what had he spotted then?
Well, Wally was interested. Read my point about the people being on different floors.
Yeah.
Wally was really interested in the thought that someone who could maybe
Flip
traverse
between floors.
floors. And I suppose, sadly, Wally's now not with us, but he was quite. He sort of saw ahead there that the idea of traversing between the floors as a 21-year-old was incredibly difficult because, of course, the MBAs would look at me and go, "Who the fuck are you?"
Yeah,
and
it's not one of us.
All the design.
So you're not one of anyone.
No, I wasn't one of anyone. I just walked up and down the stairs all day thinking, "Oh my God, this isn't working very well."
So how did you present yourself? I would imagine you were pretty confident, borderline cocky.
No, I think if I'm brutally honest, I knew within days that I was very, very underpowered in both senses, on both floors, I couldn't really. I was smart enough to keep up with the MBAs, but I didn't. I hadn't been to the London Business School. I went down to floor 2. I could understand what the designers are doing, pretty much, and knew that some of it was terrible. However, they were not going to listen to me.
Yeah.
Because half of them had been to the RCA. And they'd gone straight to Wolf Furnace from the RCA, and I've been doing it for years. And I was walking up and down the stairs, I was thinking, this is tricky. What am I going to do? And I didn't last very long, to be honest.
But that's a very grown-up, sounds so patronising, but that's a very sort of grown-up to recognise the situations and recognise your deficiencies in those.
Oh, yeah, my
most
assessment
people,
of the situation was pretty grim. Yeah.
But a lot of people would, at that age, probably not
maybe
think I'm not quite as good as them and I'm not quite as good as them, but understanding where you're at and what you're missing, which is obviously useful because once you understand that, you can address it.
Yeah, I guess. I think that it's the downside of having not gone to a named design college, of course, because if I'd come down and done foundation and gone to CSM or something, or LCP or whatever it was then, I would have had a bit more chutzpah, I'm sure, and a better portfolio. But I didn't, and I was clearly underpowered. And so I had a kind of... My solution to it in the end was to leave the country.
Yeah,
my boss at the time, Brian Boylan, lovely chap, who was the chief exec of Wolf Furnace, and I'd done a lot of work with him. They finally worked out that where I was useful was putting presentations together.
Right.
And this is pre-computer, so I would do them on slide, and I would basically seem to be able to do this. I seemed to be able to put the words and the pictures together and help Brian with this presentation. So I did that for a year. And he,
Well, it's useful experience.
Yeah, really useful. And one day he said, "Look, I've got to go on holiday. I need a break." And he said, "You should go on a break." I said, "Well," I said, "because otherwise you've got nothing to do." I went, "Well," and I'd been thinking about leaving, just because I had shocking wanderlust. And he said, "Well," and I said, "Well, I haven't got any money, Brian. It's all right. You can go on holiday. I haven't got any cash." And he said, and he ummed and ahed, and he said, "I tell you what, I'll pay for you to go on holiday wherever you want to go while I go away."
Wow.
And I'd been thinking that I wanted to leave, and I had this awful moment where I thought, what do I do here? Do I take the holiday, go away, come back and say, "Oh, by the way, I'm leaving," or do I do the decent thing? And I said, "Brian, that's amazing, but I'm leaving."
God, what an amazing offer, though.
Yeah, I know, and I felt kind of.
Have you ever offered anyone anything like that?
Maybe I should.
I know
it was an amazing offer, and of course I then, just being too honest, so I said, "Yeah, that's an amazing offer, Brian. Thank you." But the thing is, I got shocking wanderlust. I think I need to hit the road, which I did. I hadn't been away. I hadn't even done foundation.
So had you gathered up much work by then?
Hardly. No, I offered myself to the local theatre company to do more posters.
As a sideline.
As a sideline. I was trying to do projects at Wolf Furnace, but there was virtually nothing I could.
So was it a bit clubby and snobby there, or not? Did you feel slightly excluded because you weren't
a bit
from the right place?
I think, if I'm brutally honest, Wolf Furnace, well, like any of those big long-term design agencies and ad agencies, they go through peaks and troughs. I think the Wolfies at the time were in a bit of a trough.
Yeah.
They had They were doing a whole series of projects. They did Prudential at the time, and they were about to do BT not long after. And basically, their answer was brush strokes. They had a series of consecutive projects where the colour scheme was always yellow and grey.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh, this is not very good. I knew that at age 21 it wasn't very good. And so they were in a bit of a trough.
Right.
And they were going to come out of it a decade later when they did Orange and yada yada and the whole series of, but I think companies like that go up and down. And I was in a bit of a down, and they're down, which is slightly awful for me to say, but I think they'd probably accept that. There was long discussions about millions of hours spent redrawing the Prudential. Do you remember the wiggly brush Prudential?
Yeah,
do you remember that
woman's face, wasn't it?
Yeah. Prudence.
Prudence's
face was drawn by, and there was a whole thing in London graphic design where everyone did that. Yeah,
everyone did a version of that.
Yeah, the Jones logo. Do you remember the Jones logo?
Was that all Foley?
No, that was Newell and Sorrell.
Oh, I liked that. The Jones.
Yeah, and that was very influential.
Oh, really?
And so everybody ripped that off.
That one little job.
Little job. Yeah, and that influenced a lot of people, and lots of people were doing that kind of Matisse thing.
Yeah.
And God, London graphic design was a very insular world, and I just had to go, really. Also, I had a sense, to come back to one of your previous questions in a way, that what I needed to do was become a graphic designer properly, and that would mean training, getting some proper training, and that wasn't going to happen in the UK. So I thought maybe what I'd do, my plan, my strategy was I'd hit the road with boxes of glass slides, was what I did, and I'd go and work in Australia, and that's what I did.
So primarily you had your presentations rather than the work, or not? Or you had
I kind of scraped together a bunch of freelance projects, and I had enough to,
But I would imagine the Brian Boylan experience would probably come into play a bit more later, having exposure to someone like that at that period.
All of that, being in boardrooms, helping, sorting out presentations, having a marketing degree, which seemed useless at the time. Yeah, 15 years later, it's like, oh, okay, I got it. Yeah, but at the time,
it must have felt like a distraction.
Yeah, it did.
So, is that when you went to Australia?
Yes.
Yeah. So who did you work for there? Was that?
I had a whole series of jobs in Australia.
Why Australia?
Yeah, good question. I'd met someone at Wolf Owens who had come over, and I went over, and I said to her, "Oh, I'm thinking of moving over," and she said, "Sure, come and see us. I'm sure there'd be some work." And I naively, of course, as it turns out, that I arrived there and I said, "Hi, you said there'd be some work," and she looked utterly shocked, a bit like when Wally was arguing in the corridor with this creative director. She looked utterly shocked. Brought in her creative director, and he said, "Oh, how long's your visa?" And I said, "What, 6 months?" He said, "You'd be lucky to do a fucking letterhead."
Really? Brilliant.
I thought, oh shit, what have I done? And I'd moved country.
So that seems reckless. In retrospect.
Somewhat.
So you hadn't considered writing to people, giving them
no.
call
Well, this is the kind of arrogance of youth, isn't it?
Definitely said there would be. So why?
Yeah. So I was.
Why sweat it?
I know. I don't know. You think about the things you do when you're 22 and a half, don't you?
Yeah. So, how did you then get income and get an actual job to keep you there longer?
What I discovered was that if you had even a quarter of a portfolio and you were English and you had worked at Wolf Owens, you were
good
a property. Yeah. Even though I actually didn't know how to check a proof, I didn't really understand what C, M, Y, and K meant.
Right. Did you not? Really?
Not really, no, because I had not really trained as a graphic designer.
Right.
And all my theatre posters were always two colour.
Yeah, didn't need. I
couldn't check a proof. I didn't know any technical stuff at all. I could barely use a rotring, which of course is how you did your artwork. But so I kind of threw myself into it. I got a job at a company in Sydney called Billy Blue, and then I got a job at another company in Melbourne called Emery Vincent, very good company. I also went to Japan for a while, I did work there for a while, then came back to Australia. And so essentially I worked and travelled, went to America for a bit, worked and travelled for a couple of years, worked in art direction in Sydney. So I did all sorts of things. I worked for Dentsu in Japan.
Yeah, I read that.
Briefly.
How was that?
That was
in Japan. I bet there's thousands of people there, isn't there?
Well, again, I was thinking, well, this is great. I'm going to Japan. I love the work. This is amazing. And of course, the Japanese being very status is very important in Japan then, and it probably is still now. And they looked at me and thought, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And I would say, "Well, I'm here to learn from Japanese designers." And they go, "Yeah, great." And I remember I was literally at Dentsu, and they said, "We're working for Tokyo Disneyland," and the guy comes over with a Milton Glaser book. So I couldn't get rid of Milton Glaser for a while.
Yeah.
And drops it on my desk, and he goes like this. So I had to design.
That was the brief.
That was the brief. I had to design cups for Tokyo Disneyland, like Milton Glaser. I thought, so I went back to Australia.
Wow.
That was the time when you could leave the country and get another visa and come back.
Yeah.
And my love life was a bit shot to pieces, so I had to go
So
back.
what did you learn from Japan and Australia that you brought back to the UK, do you think?
I all of a sudden I had a very worldly view.
Yeah.
I came back to late 80s England, which was a bit like what you alluded to, the Michael Peters, the beautiful little layouts and liner cuts and whimsy.
Yeah, whimsy.
And I'd come
exactly,
back,
yeah.
I had my head full of design in some design in Australia, an amazing time in Japan, although it was a nightmare. Then I went to America to try and get a job there. I couldn't get a job because my hair was too long. That's a separate issue.
Fair enough.
But I came back and my eyes were utterly open. Yeah. And I came back and my portfolio was okay by then. I'd kind of clambered up.
You were a sort of different commodity to everyone
Very
else.
different. Yeah. And and I had a completely different view of everything to most of the people that I was working with, who were just utterly obsessed with, whatever was in D&AD or whatever was in Creative Review. It was a very small world. And you remember that too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It was just narrow.
Yeah. A few magazines and books, and that was everything.
Incredibly narrow.
Yeah.
I mean, utterly narrow. Yeah. And so I'd broadened myself massively in retrospect. It was kind of traumatic, but got to do that kind of thing.
And that was what, a 2-year period?
Yeah.
And so did you come back, was that Smith and Milton that you came back to, or was that Sedley Place?
My first job was at a company called Sedley Place, who were ex-Wolfonians and very craft-orientated. They
did you know, I don't know whether that's Mr. Sedley or Mr. Place, or whether that's a place called Sedley Place.
They used to have an office in town,
right,
in a little off Oxford Street, in an alleyway called Sedley Place.
Oh, okay.
And they didn't know what to call it, so they called it the alleyway.
Sedley Place.
But then when I finally got there, they moved to Clapham.
And were they two people that you knew from being at Wolfonians before? Oh, that was just a coincidence.
No, I went to see a headhunter when I got back, and she was appeared to be excited, but that's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
There was a time when people use headhunters. Weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, and they said they had some corporate work they wanted me to do, and that was a very what's the word? A roller coaster relationship that I had with Sedley Place, because they didn't really have quite enough work for me, and their bread and butter was booze, actually. Weirdly, designing whiskey labels that looked like they'd been handcrafted, but in 1879.
Right.
On the back of a horse.
Yeah.
Drawing bourbon labels, and I couldn't give two shits about that.
Yeah.
Didn't want to do a bourbon label. I knew I wanted to do brand. Well, it wasn't called branding then. I knew I was into identity.
Yeah.
That was my thing.
Not these small fiddly little one-off bits and pieces.
No. I mean, they were really into it. I understand people who get really into that whole booze thing, but your life being this label that's wrapped around a bottle, it's like that drove me crazy. And then that sort of fell apart. And then I ended up at Smith and Milton. So by the time I got to Smith and Milton, by my mid-20s, I'd done a lot in 4 years, and I ended up sort of running the corporate department.
So,
age 25, 6.
Yeah.
Which is kind of young, really.
And so your first thing in the book is a silver pencil, I noticed. I was checking that.
Yes.
Which is good to start with a silver.
Yeah, I suppose
I'm trying to think
yes.
when that was. That was about 91, something like that.
Yeah, I can't remember what. Yeah, we Smith and Milton were quite awardsy, but they had. And I think in my first year there, I did quite a lot of quite okay work, and there was enough to enter. Yeah, and a couple of them were nominated, and something won. Yeah, I can't quite remember the year, but yeah,
Yeah,
turn
it was
of
around
the 90s.
early
Yeah,
90s. But
turn of the 90s. Yeah,
yeah, I did my double checking,
very good.
and there was blanks, and then all of a sudden silver and about 5 other things in 1 year.
Yeah,
In the first year,
first year,
which
yeah.
is amazing.
I was
That's a big
26.
splash. Then, I mean,
Yeah, but yeah, relatively. But then again, within its tight little world of graphic design.
but everybody was in that tight little world, weren't they, at the time?
I guess, yes.
I mean, it's hard to sometimes when I have these chats with different people. It's slightly different now, but it was so. That D&AD was the Everest everyone was trying to climb. It was what we were all focused on, for good or bad.
For good or bad.
But it was. It's hard to explain to someone now, a bit younger, how obsessive and focused on some of those things that we all were.
Well, there are only 3 ways to have your work seen.
Yeah.
1 is to get it into creative review. 2, get it into design week, in my case, or campaign, in your case. 3, win a significant award. That was it.
Yeah.
It was the only way.
And that's what you forget with social media now, that it's obviously changed. But that's the whole point of it, I suppose, is that was how you could get noticed for what you're doing and get another job or get a rise or whatever it was. It was only those 3 ways.
It sounds a bit kind of hard-nosed in a way, but that's the honest truth of it.
Yeah.
And also, I think because I hadn't gone to a proper college, I was always felt that I was playing catch-up. So I was always reading. I was constantly reading design books. I've got this massive collection of design books, probably nearly as many as you.
No, I'm smiling because I started at poor ad agencies. I was always buying and reading ad books and design books for the very same reason, trying to compensate for
trying to get up.
Not being at BBH or College or wherever the place to be was. I was in these places that nobody ever knew, so I would compensate with books and buying these things. So at what point did you think, I'm quite good at this? I know it sounds like a tricky question, but at what point, I suppose, did you gain a bit of confidence that actually you'd overcome that initial thing at Wolf Olins?
I think in my sort of 2nd or 3rd job in Australia, I started to think that it gave me a bit of freedom. I started thinking, oh, okay, this is interesting. They had a typesetter. One company I worked for, they had a typesetter, and I was given carte blanche really to write and design a little booklet on type. I think I called it something ridiculous like "Not My Type" or something like that, and used all of their typefaces and all that kind of thing. And when I was at Sedley Place, I did a brochure for, what were they called? Thingy and Clients, Burkitt Wainwright.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I did this square brochure for Burkitt Wainwright. They had work.
Yeah.
And I did this square brochure where I drew the type on typo paper.
Right.
Got it set, redrew it, got it reset. I worked on this brochure for about 3 months. Extraordinary amount of time. And I guess I was teaching myself how to really tightly specify type. I mean, really tightly. Like hand drawing 9-point and shit like that. And also at the time, the computers were coming in, so I'd actually used some computers in Australia. So when I arrived at Sedley Place, and then at Smith & Milton, I was the Mac kid.
Right.
So I was doing all of this and also bringing the computers into companies, which I know sounds extraordinary now, doesn't it? But that was what I was doing. Yeah, I was pulling various companies. Kicking and screaming.
So that would be, trying to do my maths now. So you're talking about early 90s?
Late 80s, early 90s.
So that is really early.
Pretty early.
Neville Brody was working on a Mac, wasn't he, with the face? But ad agencies weren't.
No, Neville and Malcolm Garrett was working on. But Malcolm in the late 80s was still laying it out on a computer, then printing it out, I think, and making artwork.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, and because the transition from what was on the computer screen to actual artwork was still really dicey. So in a funny sort of way, most people were using them to kind of typeset things, and so that shift from the computer to artwork, if you like, was only. And I remember actually when I was at Smith & Milton, they were so sceptical about the computer. They made me do a test where they were doing a packaging project, and I did it all on the computer, and whilst in parallel, the designers
Just make
use
an artwork.
artwork
Yeah.
and rub downs and yada yada
And then
yada,
compare the two.
and then they compared the two. Yeah, and to be fair, the old school way of doing it looked lovely because you
Yeah.
could get those. Do you remember those custom rub downs you could get? Where you could get gold and silver,
Yeah,
and all
yeah.
that kind of shit. And
But also, not all the fonts you'd have had bad cuts of
yeah,
Bodoni and bad cuts
Yeah.
of various fonts in
Absolutely,
the early days.
yeah.
Everything wasn't available.
but I think that I had to do this to persuade them to invest in the kit, and of course the kit was really expensive then.
Mm.
When I finally started my own company, I think we had 3 computers and 1 printer, and we had to take out a 15 grand loan
For 3 computers
for
and
3
a printer.
computers and a printer.
Wow. So, what's that, 25, 30 years ago?
That is 30 years ago.
30 years ago.
Yeah,
So
92.
that's, what is that, like 50 grand or something now, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a lot of money. Yeah,
That's insane.
yeah, it was a lot of money, and it was 3 grand for the box,
Yeah.
and a couple of grand for the screen times 3, plus a little
But
crappy
you
little
were
printer.
sort of you were an early convert to
Yes.
that way of doing
Yeah.
it.
Mm.
See, I was sort of very sceptical initially and I resisted personally working on computers because I thought I'd get bogged down in the sort of detail, staring at those things. I liked the distance of
Yeah.
briefing things to a studio and then it coming back and then just looking at that. I remember I would sort of sometimes say to people and say, "Oh, can you do this?" And they go, "Well, I've got to drag it into Photoshop and do." And you go, "Well, do whatever you've got to do."
Yeah.
You know. And I thought if I'm the person thinking that's going to take me an hour to do this, and I might take other shortcuts. So anyway, I'd ended up taking it, avoiding it for a long time. Which
Well,
obviously
that's
I
the
love it now,
luxury
but
of art direction, isn't it? You can do that kind of thing.
maybe
Sit in your AMV ivory tower
Yeah.
and point at
get
things.
some young designers in the basement to do some versions.
Yeah, I
for
was
me.
kind of in the basement still at this point.
So, so where were we? So so you were sort of introducing the Mac in those really early days. So hang on, 92. So we had Macs, but only in the studio in advertising.
Yeah. Yeah, so I finally set up my own company, kind of earlier than planned, really.
So, how old were you when you set up?
Well, I was in my head. I thought, well, I was clearly a difficult employee.
Did you feel a difficult employee at Smith & Milton?
Oh yeah, no. Well, I had 8 jobs in 8 years.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Which ones have we missed?
I don't know. There was so many of them, and I got fired at least 2 or 3 times probably.
For what? Insubordination? Or?
Insubordination. one time a meeting that they
Answering
didn't
back.
take me went so badly that I walked out from one company and they didn't come back for 4 days.
You didn't?
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I wasn't a great employee.
So,
To be fair.
So when did you start? So
I was
30
28.
years. So you were 28 when
Yeah.
you started your own design. That seems young.
I think now it's not.
Is
but
it
then,
not now?
Then now, because a lot of people
Well, now you can do it from your
now
bedroom.
you can do it pretty much from college.
Yeah.
Then that was pretty young, yes. But I'd kind of, for good or for bad, I'd kind of been on the speed journey
Yeah.
throughout all of whether it be branding, art direction, advertising,
So what, you had 8 years experience or something?
something like that. Yeah, somehow I'd kind of crammed in.
And again, coming back to confidence, it takes a lot of balls to think at 28, I'll go it alone. Then, and to get a loan for 15 grand or whatever.
I think, frankly, I'd become unemployable.
Really? It's
I'm
the
not
only thing
sure I
left.
could have got a job by that point because my CV looked like a kind of disaster zone. You only needed to be slightly bright. You'd go, there's a lot of jobs on there,
Yeah,
Michael.
17 jobs in 4 years. That seems that may be a problem.
Yeah.
But you'd done lots of good work and won lots of awards. It's
Some.
not like
I know, not lots, but I've done some. Yeah, I've done some useful, some things which I'm not sure if they stack up now, but a couple of things that maybe one would look back at and think, that's right. Yeah.
I've looked at them quite recently. I thought it was good. I mean, I would have thought you're 20 odd pieces into D&AD, a
By
pencil
then.
or two. Yeah,
Yeah?
you're not. It's not like you're, a beginner.
No.
You've got some credentials. You've built your book up.
Yes,
to-
that's fair.
you know.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, what surprised you about setting? Firstly, I've got to ask, who's Banks?
Okay, Banks. Banks was my client. When I
Right.
was at Smith & Milton, I'd sort of effectively taken over a third of the work. Most of the work was packaging still. But there was a corporate division run by Jay Smith, but Jay was between babies, and they kind of effectively wanted someone to run the corporate bit, and that ended up being me. I had a team of 5 people who all promptly left because I did all the work, and I thought they were terrible, and they all left. And so I just did all of the work.
And would they have known that you thought they were terrible? How
Probably.
did you manage them?
Sadly, I think as then as now, I'm a shocking manager.
Right.
Now, I think the telltale sign with me is that I would basically go, yeah, and then do it myself.
Yeah.
Because by that time I was very fast,
Yeah.
and also pretty clued up on the machinery. So
Yeah.
what was I asking? Oh, banks. Okay, so one of Smith & Mill's clients was Legal and General. Banks was the client marketing team there. We have a Christmas lunch, a Christmas dinner. We walk past it, and I say, well, work past some building, and I say, well, that could be, it could be Johnson Banks one day, as a joke, kind of.
To the client,
a little bit tipsy, and he took this really seriously. And by the time I left Smith & Milne to go effectively freelance, which was when, I don't know when that is, 92, summer of 92, he then comes to me with a proposal, which was that he would leave Legal and General with 2 or 3 significant bits of work.
Oh, brilliant.
And for 3 years, 2.5 years, that was fine. And we had a bit of cash cow, whilst I was building up the kind of beautiful stuff. So quite useful.
Yeah.
It's just that by year 3, I realised I was doing a lot of the work.
Yeah.
And it was a bit, and also we were at slightly different life points. He had a small family. He didn't really, you're running a 3-man design company. It's hard. I mean, it's really hard. So you've got to do 12-hour, 14, 16, 18-hour days, and he just didn't want to do that. So we were out of whack. And also, I think one year I added up how many proposals we'd written, and 80% of them I'd written.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, this is not quite...
Yeah. Designing and writing the proposals.
Yeah, not really what we signed up for. So there was a kind of, a mutual agreement, agreed to disagree. And
so that was 3 years in?
3 years in, yeah.
Yeah.
So 3 years in, I've lost my account director, effectively. But we were... And also, I'm not sure we'd really done particularly great work, actually, if I'm being brutally honest. But then we started to get, pretty much after that point, we started to get some useful projects,
And was that a coincidence, or was that...
I don't know.
Because...
Not sure.
You made all the decisions?
Possibly.
Or, I don't know, coincidence?
I don't know, really. I think I would say I have a kind of rule in my head, is that you've got to do, by 3 or 4 years in, you've got to have done something that differentiates you from the company you used to work for.
Yeah.
I always tell this to startups when they come and talk to me in my studio. And I say, you've got to do something fairly early.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just a cut-price version of where you used to work.
Yeah. So what had you done in the first 3 years?
Bugger all, really. But
because obviously you got that very useful bunch of Legal and General work, which stops you panicking and fleeing back to where you used to come, or freaking out.
And we'd done some of the obligatory paper company stuff.
Oh yeah, I've seen some of that. That was good. Yeah,
it was quite nice.
Yeah.
But nothing, I don't think, if I'm brutally honest, that you would even look back at now. But then I think in 95, 96, we did a project for the V&A for a William Morris exhibition, and I think for the first time we did something that was not like anyone else in town, where we took you might not remember it, but we took one of William Morris's acanthus leaves.
Yeah.
Sorry, a real acanthus leaf, and it turned into a Morris acanthus leaf, which was a painfully difficult piece of retouching.
Yeah.
But then it was all over London, and I remember thinking, okay, now that is different. Didn't have any of that English wit and whimsy thing. Okay, it had a twist, but it didn't feel... if anything, it felt a bit more like all those Japanese art director handles that I loved. It had this kind of beauty to it. And I remember thinking, And then a year later, we started working for the British Council, and we did some very early posters, kind of like cut and shut posters. That were kind of the first...
Advertising, really.
Kind of, cool, And they were sort of the first exposition of Cool Britannia, actually, as it was then called. And so then we were starting to find our feet.
So I would imagine that's... I was going to ask, how did you find the transition of running your own place, because obviously you're responsible for other people. You're responsible for the income, the building, the 15 grand loan for the max. So it's sometimes quite hard to be as expressive and bold and daring as you want to be when you feel under pressure.
Yeah.
But obviously you'd had that period of 3 years where it was tough. So to sort of come out of that with the William Morris stuff and the Britain stuff, that feel like someone's just enjoying doing that, is almost like a trick, isn't it?
Yeah, and also I suppose learning to try and be a better boss. You know, learning to, by that time I think I had 2 designers and then I had 3. Learning how to, find good designers, persuade them to come and work for a little startup, which at the time was in Chelsea, down at the wrong end of the King's Road.
Yeah.
And but we're starting to build a portfolio by then and starting to do some interesting work. And then the reputation starts to snowball in the right way. So that was, I'm learning lots.
So it felt like that's starting to be, you're starting to do stuff that's more you, and it's starting to get noticed.
Yeah, because I'd definitely come back to the UK thinking I wanted to do things that stood out and felt different to the UK, what I would call the wit and whimsy scene, Pentagram at the time were always working in a particular way, and the partners were. So the 80s seemed to drag on into the 90s in design terms. And I really was quite bored of all of that, centered letter space type and all that. So, Jesus, please, not again,
So who would you have admired at that time, designers? Were there anybody you would be checking out or envious of? Or?
Well, they were all international by this stage. Having said that, I think there was quite an interesting period for English design, because there were people coming through prepared to ask questions about what the right way to do it, like why not Associates and Tomato, and people like that were. I couldn't necessarily design like that, but in retrospect, you think, well, at least they had a bit of chutzpah, and they were thinking, well, there's a different way. It doesn't have to be because I think, much as I love that 70s and 80s pentagram thing, it did kind of lock British design into a way of working. Gosh, for 15, 20 years, because several of the founding partners of the partners came from Pentagram. So there was this kind of
that continuation,
perpetuation of the type gag, and if in doubt, do it in Baskerville, and Carol Densby Thurkel in the 80s. Everything was very beautiful and liner cuts, and choose a really good illustrator, and do a.
It's interesting because those designers, it almost feels like they did what punk did to music in the 70s. That I wouldn't particularly listen to much punk, but it probably loosened it all up. So it's interesting for me now to look at, I used to keep scrapbooks of these things, again, because there was no Mac. And it's full of things from Tomato, David Carson, Why Not Associates, someone else you mentioned, I can't remember who it was. And when I look at it now, it's hard to like it a lot.
Yes.
But it was so different at the time.
It was.
And I would occasionally think, I need to do some cool, funky, messed up stuff like that, and obviously I could never do it. I haven't got that sort of sensibility, because I don't know how you even begin it. And I'm linked to, I see David Carson stuff on LinkedIn occasionally, and he does stuff that's similar, but and I don't even know where you begin to do that stuff. And I would try occasionally, but I just couldn't get anywhere with it.
I think what it was,
it seemed cool.
It was the what's the word? It was the preparedness to try something else.
Yeah.
I think that in retrospect, that was what was good about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does look very much of the time.
Yeah.
As do most of those design phases. Yeah. Everything tends to look over time. And I suppose I'm learning on the job and thinking, how do I want my company to work? And even then, I could tell that was going to be design that would be very much of the 90s. You could sort of tell that. And I've always been very interested in trying to design things that you couldn't date.
Yeah.
Which is the hardest thing to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
But that is a massive challenge, actually. And I think we failed in some instances, but generally, actually, we haven't done badly on that.
So around this time, you must have been commissioned to do the D&AD annual.
Yes, of course,
So that
that's a really good point. I've forgotten about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's possibly my favourite one, I think.
The pencil
which
case.
Is the pencil case, yeah.
The pencil case, yes. Mary Lewis, yes.
So Mary Lewis chose you to do that.
Yes, slightly amazingly. I'm not really sure why. Mary and I had talked about me possibly working there. It never worked out, and I can't.
She's quite feisty, isn't she?
Very feisty. Lovely, but feisty.
Yeah.
But they were right up there in terms of work at the
Yeah.
time. When we talked about me working there, but it never quite... I can't for the life of me remember why it didn't work. Anyway, it didn't work, but I got to know Mary, I think possibly through DNA. I don't know. No, I think that to your point about the winning the odd thing here and there had brought me onto her radar.
Yeah.
And then when it came to be her turn to pick someone, whenever that was, gosh, early 90s.
Got it here.
92,
I think it's
3?
4.
4.
I think I'll double check that.
So she probably would have asked me in 3.
94, yeah.
Yeah, so I would have been asked in 93. And there's a fabulous story behind this. Do you know this story?
No.
Okay, so it transpired that I knew a lovely lady who worked at D&AD at the time, and she had told me over...
Paula?
No, Beverly.
Beverly, I know Beverly.
Beverly.
Yeah. Beverly, yeah.
Anyway, Beverly had told me after one or too many drinks one evening that she'd explained to me how that D&AD were locked into a contract with their publisher. And maybe I shouldn't go into too many details on this.
30 years ago. I think the police, it's a cold case now. I don't think that.
Well, so essentially, she was explaining to me how dreadful this contract was,
Yeah.
and how they had no control, and there was nothing they could sort of do about the
This was
inside
the
of
Booth Clibben
It was, yes.
contract,
Yes,
yeah.
it was the famous Booth Clibben contract, for which D&AD had virtually no control,
Yeah.
even over the layout or anything like that, and what have you. And she said, the only thing about this contract that's any good is that whatever the committee wants for the cover,
They
the
have to
committee
do
gets.
for a certain price.
And she explained this to me in a sort of, this is such a nightmare. God, this contract's dreadful. But I remember logging this piece of information.
So this was before you were commissioned to
yes,
do an
before I was
annual?
commissioned. So she'd told me this. I think when I'd first been a judge. I'd been a judge before I was a judge at Smith & Milton, so it must have been, I don't know, end of the 80s, early 90s. I judged for the first time, and I met Beverly, and we got on. I suppose because I was, wasn't old and grey or whatever. Anyway, she told me the contract thing, and I remember thinking, interesting. So, so it meant that when Mary came to me and said, "Would you like to do the annual?" I go, "Wow, that's amazing. I'm 12. I shouldn't be doing the annual cover." But you don't say no.
Yeah.
I remembered the clause, and I went away and I thought about it and did.
So you thought there's almost a limitless budget.
Effectively, because I knew the contract.
What a brilliant
clause.
serendipitous piece of information
Absolutely.
to find out.
So, and by that time I met a really good model maker through a photographer, Dave Stewart's
Yeah.
Wesley West, the brilliant model maker who had met through Dave Stewart, the photographer, on a project for the Design Council. Beautiful project, actually. And I got Wesley to mock up the pencil case idea and took it to the then D&AD committee.
So you didn't show any drawings or...
I showed them to Mary.
Yeah.
Showed her a few scribbles.
And
she goes, "That's fantastic.
Yeah.
We've got to do that." And so I get it mocked up beautifully by Wesley, and then either she goes to the committee with it, or I go, or maybe she takes it once, and then I have to go and
Present
it. And there's just all hell lets loose in the room. Everyone going, a mixture of I love this. How the fuck are we going to do it?
Oh, so it was unanimously there was no
my memory
awkward
is it was
advertising people
unanimously
saying,
and but then almost immediately, how are we going to do that? And then I told them the clause.
Brilliant.
So as part of the pitch, I didn't tell them first off.
Yeah.
I let them kind of get into it,
and then
I said,
there's a way of doing
and
it.
when someone says, how are we going to wrap whatever it was, 3,000 annuals in yellow rubber?
God, that's amazing.
And anyway, I explained to them, well, actually, guys, you can do this because the contract says whatever you want has to happen. Anyway, there's then this long contractual wrangle with the Booth Clibben, I think it was, and the printers. Anyway, it looks touch and go for months and months and months and months, and then eventually I get a message. I think it was from Beverly saying, "Michael, I've just had a message from someone saying that the printer in China has bought 3,000 meters of yellow sou'wester material."
That
and that was when I knew that it was going to happen. But it was really touch and go for a while there.
Brilliant.
because I think it single-handedly added £10
Did it £10 per annual?
per annual.
Did it really? Wow.
Yeah. I think that's how the printer got over the hump. They
Wow.
said, "Well, we will do this, but you've got to
But
pay
it's
us.
this much extra.
You've got to pay us 3,000 times £10. What's that?
Whatever that is, £30,000.
Doesn't seem that much.
Yeah, bargain.
Bargain.
But
yes.
God, what a brilliant story though. What a weird thing to log that bit of information, which
I do
leads
that.
to. Because when you look through the annuals, obviously after, I don't think before that, I don't think anyone had even done a non-paper cardboard cover, had they?
I'd
Few
always
people.
loved Gaskin's cover.
Oh yeah, it had a plastic wraparound.
Plastic wraparound that you could blow up should you want, with a non-return valve.
Yeah, was it? I can't remember.
Yeah, which is why whenever you saw it in a design college, it never had the cover.
Yeah, that's right.
Because
yeah.
people would blow it up and they couldn't return it, and so they'd chuck
Yeah.
it away. I always thought that was lovely, but I always thought the downside of Malcolm Gaskin's cover, which was a blow-up one, was that it was removable.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. It felt like
It felt like a
it wasn't
dust
part
jacket.
of it. Yeah, I suppose you had done that. So did that slightly influence you? If you loved it, you must
I
have
loved
logged
it, yeah,
somehow.
but I remember always thinking the only caveat with that design.
Do you know why it was? Do you know why that design? Why is that? Why it's that inflatable?
I don't know.
Because there's an ad that went with it. It said, due to inflation, the annual is now £30 rather than 25, or whatever it is. You think is that
What
it?
came
It's
first,
just
the
a-
ad or
It's
the
just
idea?
they're combined. It was obviously because it was an inflation gag, so that put me off it. Because I thought
I
God,
didn't
it's just
know that.
it's just a little thing that the thing's a bit dearer, so they've got an inflation.
I think I just love the
Yeah,
kind
it's
of,
a sort of tactile, different kind of thing.
I think I was also really into Oldenburg at the time. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking, what would Klaus Oldenburg do with the D&AD annual? And I will often play those word games thing with your pencil, and everyone had done tons of pencil gags. But
Yeah.
where do you put your pencil? Put the pencil case. Could we make it like a pencil case? Wow, could we make it like a pencil case? Oh, well, that
Yeah.
would mean a zip, and it need to be padded, and then
Yeah,
your
perfect.
brain goes, you know.
So presumably, when you did that win a pencil or something?
No, at that time,
Did you not? Could you not enter?
actually, it did get into the annual.
Did it?
Yes, weirdly,
But
I always
didn't
think
win something.
no, but I think that's in a way that's fine, isn't it? Because
It's fine. I mean, the jurors are not thinking, "Oh, we better give it an award because it's for D&AD." If anything, it goes against it.
I think it does,
think.
yeah. And in a way, it would be a bit weird, wouldn't
But
it?
that feels like one of those ideas. When you think of it, you then get really anxious that it's not going to get bought. Do you know what I mean? Because you think, well, that's perfect. It's the
Well-
pencil case is like the perfect idea, and it's the
I always forget about
well
the project.
executed.
That's a very
it's different.
good bit of dredging. I forget about the project,
Yeah.
which is
Oh, it's
silly.
excellent. I think. Well, what is your favourite one?
And what annual?
Yeah, would it be Gaskin's? Malcolm
yes,
Gaskin's?
yes, I'm sure.
Is it really
yeah,
your
yeah,
favourite one?
Yeah. That was
I tell you what I
always
hate about that book, though, just getting really super nerdy. The text is at an angle and in light grey.
good. Oh,
So if you have
inside,
to
yes,
look
dreadful.
if you have to look up anything, it's
Yeah,
an absolute
shockingly-
nightmare, which
shockingly
I do.
shit.
But inside,
I
anyway.
did, and I also loved the one that the Bible is good.
I really like that one. I was saying that to
Yeah, I like that one
Michael
a lot.
the other day.
I can't remember who did that.
It's Paul Arden.
Is it Arden
Yeah.
who did that one? Everyone calls it the Bible, so let's
Yeah.
make it look like a Bible.
But it feels like a good thing to be in. Doesn't it? It feels
Yes.
like weighty and
Yeah.
not clever in a way, but just cool.
You were tracking them all down, did you?
I've
Did
got
you,
them.
have you got them all down?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also like what was the ones that would I'd say yours, the Bible, the Bob Gill 68 with all the discount things, and the 99 one with the by the guy who does the Pet Shop Boys.
Oh, Mark Farr.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a beautiful
With
one.
the pinpoints for every.
Yeah, that's very nice.
Those
yeah.
would be the four best ones. I think.
Yeah, they're very nice. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
nice one. Yeah. With that piece, that aluminium slipcase.
With the aluminium slipcase.
chops
Yeah.
your fingers off
Yeah.
every time. Yeah.
But it's such a beautiful looking thing, and all relevant and stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's lovely.
So you did that, and then presumably did that lead to you going on the committee, D&AD? We've got a little D&AD section we're going to go through now. Little D&AD channel.
Yes, I think probably yes.
Probably brought you to their
brought me
attention.
onto their radar,
Yeah.
and I think when the next gap came up, which would have been later in the 90s,
Yeah.
there was at that time you had. Oh, I think I tried to be elected, didn't get on, because in those days you had to write
You
something.
had to write,
didn't
I
you?
wrote something, yeah.
And anyway, and I remember I didn't take it very seriously. And then I looked at what everyone had written. I thought, oh, okay, I've got to take this seriously. So I wrote this real, quite full-on manifesto, which
Right.
was, and did get onto
What
the
was that
committee.
about? What would that have been about?
It was actually about, oh, God, that's a really good question. What was that about? I think it was a sort of manifesto for both advertising and design, that they should both be equal and they both be taken seriously. Because by that time, I'd been in the boardroom a lot. I knew that you had to appeal to both constituencies.
Yeah.
And
So let's get some votes from advertising
let's get some
people.
votes from
They
the
can vote
advertising.
as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Knowing that they wouldn't vote for me because they wouldn't know who
So
I
you're
was.
like the Michael Jordan of the time. Republicans buy sneakers too. Let's not alienate those guys.
But I remember getting onto the committee, the D&AD committee, and I went to the first meeting. And David Stewart from the partners came up to me at the first meeting and say, "So are you running for president?"
At the first meeting.
At the first meeting.
What? Just your demeanour, your vibe? Well, you've just set up your own company. You've just done the last.
But
annual.
I'm something like, I don't even know how old I am at this point. I think I'm
31,
30 something.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking.
So was he saying that in a you should or you shouldn't?
He was, to be brutally honest, he was saying that in a "you're not going to run, are you?"
Oh, really?
kind of way,
Yeah.
because he wanted to be president and he wanted to run.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I remember thinking at the time, well, that's absolutely fine, because I wasn't, absolutely not. I don't think people believe me when I say this, but I absolutely was not thinking about being DNA. I was kind of made up to be on the committee, actually,
Yeah.
because at that time, rightly or wrongly, DNA was quite a big thing to me. I had bought all of the annuals. I borrowed £2,000 off of my mother, bought a whole set of the annuals off.
You bought them all in one.
I bought them
bunch.
all at that point in one job lot, yeah. And I was like a student thereof,
Yeah.
of poring over the old annuals like a geek. What a wanker, really. Gosh,
Hard to believe you was a geek.
Believe what a geek. And so I was just kind of made up to be on the committee, and I thought, well, this is great. This is fun. I'm going to enjoy this. And so, of course, I was not going to run for president because I was 12, and David Stewart from the partners clearly felt it was his time to run, and he did, and that's fine. But I just remember the first meeting.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? It's a bit like, The Firm or one of those kind of things in retrospect. Because, as I say, I also had David Kester saying an equivalent thing. We think you shouldn't run. It would be better if it was Larry Barker, not you, which
Okay.
I also hadn't even given it the slightest thought.
No.
So it was probably a relief, if anything, to think, I'm not. But it's funny I wonder, there's only two of us here who've been on the committee and, arguably both been stood down at different points to go. It's strange, isn't it, in a way? It seems to me.
Kind of, yeah. I mean,
That's normal.
It was very important to him, I think. I think Aziz had been president, and David, who was the other key main partner of the partners, was wanting to.
And did you find it useful being on the committee? Because I found that they didn't particularly seem like it felt like a chore when they would have to listen to the committee turn up with their fanciful ideas of what should and shouldn't be.
I think it took me a couple of years to get my head around it. I quite enjoyed the interplay with the advertising community.
Yeah, you met some
which I
nice
didn't,
people. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't. It was at a time where I think there was much closer ties, or potentially closer ties, between design and advertising, and I was interested in that. Had worked on the other side in Australia. I kind of found it very interesting. Met some interesting people. Started to have ideas about what one could do. And at an away day, someone said, "Well, anyone got any ideas?" And I said, "Well, you're coming up to your 40th birthday. You should do something for that,
Yeah.
And so by this time it's the late. Where am I now?
90s.
Yeah, it's the turn of the century actually, and so it must have been 2000 by this point. And I said, we were doing quite a lot of work for the V&A by then, and I said, well, I might be able to get us into the V&A. And everyone sort of turned their heads very quickly. I went, "What do you mean, Michael?" I said, "Well, maybe there's an exhibition of this. You're going to be 40."
Yeah.
And by this time, I was also talking to Fiden about a book project that was sort of in the works. And I said, "Well, publishers might be interested in a 40 years book." And they all turned their heads at me again. And anyway, so I was just doing what I do, think of things and see if it would work. So sure enough, by 2000, whatever it was, there was an exhibition at the V&A, and we pushed the 40 Years book through Phaidon, which actually, in retrospect, is quite something.
It's a big deal, yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I didn't really take it that... at the time, I hadn't really thought about it, but I remember, I think it was Tony Kaye in the early 90s or mid-90s who said that he thought that advertising is art and should be celebrated in museums. And by 2002, that's exactly what happened.
Funny, so you'd registered that?
Yeah.
Because he was kind of received when he was saying that as a bit of a nutter, you know.
He was.
I think he was outside of the V&A or somewhere with
he was,
signs or protests that more advertising wasn't in there.
And I think at the time I thought, guy's a nutter. But when you looked at the ads, as I did in the 90s going to D&AD, as one did then, you sit back and go, wow, that's amazing, you know. And sure enough, you know, less than a decade later, there was his work in the V&A.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, it's quite something, really. And I stayed on another year to do that, another year on the committee to do that. And then they sort of changed the rules and suggested that I become president.
So how did that come about then? So you started off day one saying don't become president, and then they changed the rules for you to become president.
Yeah, 4 years later, the powers that be said, Michael, have you thought about being president? I said, I can't be president because you can't be on the committee for more than 3 years, and I've now been on 4 years. And they said, well, maybe we could change the rules. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. And so I'm asked to leave the room. I come back, and then there's a conversation. I come back in the room, and they said, yeah, we're going to change the rules. And I'm thinking...
So I can't remember how you become president. Is it that the committee votes on the next president?
Well,
I can't remember the process now.
Yeah, basically, yes. Unless, and they try to avoid this like the plague, or did, I don't quite know what the rules are now, they try to avoid an election of people on the committee who want to be...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they try to... What's the word? They try to arrange it.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, with all these... You stand down, you do this. Because my memory is that you put yourself forward and then they pick. But I don't know if it's the committee or the members that pick, whether it's like that. You know, I remember writing
it's the committee. You
put yourself piece forward. When you put yourself forward for the committee and people have to vote on you. Yeah. It seems quaint in a way that you'd write a few sentences about why you should be on and people would pick one or the other. But, I mean, it just shows the how long ago it was that I was on that. One of the biggest debates we had is whether we should call ourselves British Art and Design or we should drop the British. Should we add it or should we drop it? And I can't remember where we were in that cycle, but it seems funny now because it would ever be called British Advertising Design.
Yeah, no. Well,
it's just on that turn.
I suppose it was British at the time, but then when you get into the noughties and then into the teenies or whatever
it completely
they're called.
changes.
Yeah.
So how did you find that then? That seems very grown up to become president of D&AD.
Yeah, president of D&AD.
Did you have an agenda that you... Did you feel strongly that you wanted to do stuff?
I mean, at the time, I think I was sort of trying to piggyback off the Rewind project, the 40 Years project. It was called Rewind.
Yeah.
And I was trying to encourage a bit more crossover between advertising and design. In
what sense when you say crossover? Because, as I said, you sort of skate between the two. Most ad agencies and design companies stay in their own. Certainly, then is there more crossover now? Or not? I don't know.
Not really. No, I introduced a new category that then became kind of adopted by the ad agencies, integrated.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to integrate design and advertising, but then that got completely dismembered. What else? I kind of canned the president's lectures and had a series of debates. That was interesting.
Did you? You had debates instead of lectures?
Yeah, well, I had a season of debates and then a season of lectures.
And how did they work? Would that be two opposing people get up and...
I had 3 or 4, actually.
Oh, okay. Like what? Who did you have? Do you remember?
Well, I would have people kind of... we definitely had one about education. We had one about... crikey, this is going back. Something about... there was a real thing in design at the time, which was about the kind of sort of self-expression, reading a lot of Baudrillard and then doing some kinetic postmodern typography. So I intentionally put some protagonists on stage and sort of lit the touch paper because I thought it would be interesting.
Yeah.
Why people... I no one seems to do that anymore. I don't know why. It's a bit
Yes,
strange.
less arguing now than there used to be.
Yes, and it was at a time when I Magazine was sort of finding its feet, and there was a sense of you would get quite interesting discussions between the old guard and the new guard, and I suppose I sat a bit on the cusp of both,
Yeah.
and was able to persuade Rick Poyner to sit on a committee with, someone who would argue a different way, and the conversations were pretty interesting. I think in a way, though, I was sort of my big project had been a year before the Rewind project.
Yeah.
But I was just kind of
Ideally, post-rationalising, that would be perfect to tie in
that
with
would
the
have been
presidency.
perfect.
Yeah. So, did you learn anything from doing that presidency?
Well, I discovered lots of people in the advertising industry, such as yourself, and we, for a while there, that was very useful.
Yeah.
Kind of tailed off a bit later in the noughties, but what else did I learn? I kind of got very distracted, though, by it, utterly distracted by it. And then one day in 2002/3, my accountant shuffled over to me and he said, with a piece of paper in his hand, looked a little grey, and he said, "Michael, got 20 grand in the bank."
Right.
And so I lifted my head up from some proofs of a book I'd been writing, and whilst being president, and I'd utterly taken my eye off the ball.
Yeah.
And I didn't. So I think what I learned was I had to kind of concentrate a bit harder, and I had to learn how to do boring things like read a profit and loss.
Yeah.
And know how much we needed to turn over each month.
So you would imagine then there used to be this feeling that if you did work that won awards and you got PR, then the work followed.
A bit.
I would imagine. So obviously you couldn't get more PR than being president of D&AD. You're designing annuals, you're winning awards.
Yeah.
So it certainly felt like in advertising that if you do that stuff, the clients kind of follow you, whereas I don't think that's the case now.
No, I don't think that is the case now. No, I think we found our feet by the noughties, yes. And we were starting to do some projects which became, what do we call them, foundational projects for even where we are now. We did Shelter in 2004, 4. And that, doing the Shelter rebrand, gosh, that opened door after door after door after door after door.
Did it really?
Yeah. Yeah,
why was
amazing.
that? Why was that so influential?
Well, at the time, so this is 18, 19 years ago, the way that charities rebranded was very hit and miss. They either just phoned their mate, so we think our logo's a bit shit, or they just had a shit logo and nobody cared.
Right. So they weren't taken as a business. They went to.
Yes, or if you take someone like Bernardo's, if they had any money, they would go to BBH, who would do great ads for them for nothing.
Yeah.
It was not taken seriously. Charities were not taken seriously as potential client by anyone, really. The ad agencies loved them but as long as they did some pro bono work that would win them awards, design agencies wouldn't probably go anywhere near them, actually, because they would just think they would be asked to do some jumping little people, You remember the jumping people, sort of legacy from the Wolfolians 80s stuff, little brushstroke figures and shit like that. Still quite a lot of them around. I call them sprites. A lot of dancing sprites in the charity industry, or hearts. So pretty, And I got a call from Martin Galton, Hooper Galton at the time, who I'd got to meet Martin and Hooper. Oh, not Hooper so much, but more Martin. Anyway, the call went on. Basically went, "Michael, do you know any freelancers?" I said, "Yeah, why?" And he said, "Well, we're going to do some work for Shelter, and they told us they want a new logo, and we just figured we'd get a freelancer to do it." This is exactly how the conversation went. I went, "Well, I wouldn't mind doing that, And I think that basically there was a sort of astonished voice on the other end of the phone saying, "Really? You want to do the logo for Shelter?" And I'm going, "Yeah, of course I want to do the logo for Shelter." Went, "Oh, okay." And that was kind of the way that life was then.
And was that a free, minimally paid thing?
We did not get paid a lot.
Yeah.
We didn't do it pro bono. But what we did was we possibly for the first time for an English charity, we went, okay, this is a proper project. We're going to do this properly. Shelter, had been known for people living on the pavement in cobble boxes, homelessness, and because of the Labour government that was then in power, that problem had sort of been sorted out, and Shelter were trying to tack to being a housing charity, a bad housing charity, and so they wanted to look less agile and more grown up.
Okay, yeah,
so that
perfect.
was kind
Perfect
of brief.
logo,
And luckily we had this lovely idea of putting a little house in the H, and the quickest board presentation I ever did. Basically, well, I'd done this logo, held up board, turned it over, and they all went, "Oh, nice." But that was it.
Yeah.
None of the 37 pages of PowerPoint
Yeah.
applications you have to do now. And there was a little slightly tricky bit with Hooper Galton where I think their noses were slightly out of joint because they'd done some logos as well.
Right, awkward.
Yeah, slightly awkward with bricks in and stuff. They were dreadful. Oops, sorry, Hooper and Galton. Anyway, but I think they could see that actually this Shelter written in Helvetica light with a roof on the H was a banging idea.
Simple.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that was the brief, which is
Yes.
obviously even better.
Yeah, we need to grow up, and then we did the whole identity like it was a proper identity project, and then that just opened door after door after door. Phone rang for a decade.
Yeah.
Because of that project.
Because of that project.
Yeah.
And did you imagine that might lead to anything, or did you just think, well, we've got the capacity, it's a nice thing to do?
I don't know really. I just thought that they deserved to be taken seriously. You know, and they went from something like 50,000 service users to 5 million or something. It was amazing, the difference it made.
So do you think that the guy saying we've got 20k in the bank sort of alerted you to do more stuff, actively reach out? So I can remember, I can't remember how we met, but I remember we were working on our CDD house book, which was lovely.
Yeah.
That you did. And I think you'd come in for a meeting and you said, "Oh, what's that Mary Down thing?" I said, "Oh, it's a thing that we're presenting." So is there literally nothing had been done on it? I think I probably had some drawings or mock-ups on the wall.
Yeah.
And you went, "Oh, I'll do one of those for you if you want." So, in fact, I don't even think you did. I think you said, "Oh, that's nice." And then my memory is Friday, and then Monday morning you sent a couple in.
Yeah.
Just none had been commissioned or anything, and there was one done already.
Yeah.
But that's a sort of active, lively, awake thing.
I
mean, obviously you liked it, but you acted upon it straight away, and then all of a sudden there's one done for free. I
thought it was a lovely idea, and really lovely idea. And I can't remember what we were meeting about.
I think probably that book. I can
it
only
was
imagine.
before the book.
Was it before the book?
Yeah, I'm sure of it. I can't remember.
Oh, it would be before the book, because the book worked both ways because of those things.
Yeah.
I can't remember why we were.
I don't know why.
I don't know. But I suppose what I'm saying is the energy and to observe and the energy to make something happen like that is unusual.
Well, I think that
to bother to do that. I don't know whether it was done over the weekend or that.
No, I did it in the cab after the meeting.
Did you? Yeah.
Well, I think what I found is that if I sit in a meeting and I've immediately got ideas, then and my brain is going to.
You have to get them out. Yeah,
happened in the meeting yesterday. Wrote about 4 copy lines straight after the meeting, and then that's always a really good sign.
Yeah.
You're thinking, oh, okay, my brain is ticking on this one.
Yeah.
I remember thinking that's a lovely idea. You're up the merry and the down of cider drinking. And I'd drawn it I will have the sketchbook somewhere.
Will you?
Yeah, and I'd drawn it in the cab, and I remember thinking, oh, that's nice. Oh, maybe I should send it to Dave. And so
I suppose I'm wondering whether that jolt of shock of finance just made you slightly more alive to what's happening and what's out there and stuff.
I wonder,
you know, whether you say to Martin, well, I'll do it. Whether if that was before that, you might say, oh, I don't know.
Well,
you just sort of...
I think I realised at that point that, when I think we would have been 10 years in as a company, that I needed to get my shit together a bit. And I literally didn't know how much we needed to turn over each month. I had no idea. I had never had to really worry about it. We'd moved into a new office that I'd bought off the proceeds of the 90s. I had a bit of cash in the bank. We bought this office and we'd converted it but used all the money converting the building. I'd got utterly distracted by it, writing my first book, the NAD, and and it's a good question though. Did it? I don't know, if I'm honest. I think what I just knew was we probably had to reach out. I probably had to make a few new contacts. You know. Yeah, I mean the trials and tribulations of running a small design company is kind of challenging sometimes. When we did Shelter, we didn't know where it would lead. We just knew that.
But it might lead somewhere. If you didn't do it, you wouldn't lead anywhere. If you did it, it might lead somewhere.
It might, yeah. And I knew that I felt very strongly that I wanted to do it well. And also, I noticed that me and the designers who worked on it, we were very driven by it. And I think that was when I loved doing cultural stuff for the Design Council and British Council and people like that. But also doing this famous charity. And that kind of drive that it gave us and the determination to do something really well. I remember thinking, well, this is interesting. And that made us very, very open to the next charity.
Yeah.
And what we could say to them is, well, we did this properly. Do you want to do this properly? And then we'd have an interesting conversation with the next charity and we'd say, well, we can't do this pro bono.
Yeah.
We know you've spoken to your ad agency who are going to give it to the freelancer.
Yeah.
We say we can't do it pro bono, but we can do it at sort of 60 to 70% of fees. If you can't afford that, then you have to accept the fact that we can't bring you back for a couple of days. And what I discovered was that if I said to entrepreneur, social impact people and what we call not-for-profits, whatever we'd call them now, if I said to them, look, if you can pay us fairly, then we can call you back the same day. If you don't pay us fairly, you have to wait 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
And you could see them in the meetings going, he's got
Fair
a point
enough.
there.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
I find it a really weird thing that these pro bono projects.
Yes.
Because I always say now, you mean free?
Yeah.
Because there's no pro or bono. It's just like,
No.
I find them really weird because it's the same with ad agencies. If ad agencies do them pro bono, whatever the hell that means, what it means is the ad agency are doing something for awards, essentially. And you think, well, why would you just hand that over? You know, why don't you get something done properly for you, like you're a real client? And I've tried that a few times, and it's tricky. It's always tricky.
The more I was I guess I was growing up by this point, if I'm honest. And the more I was thinking that, just doing something for virtually nothing for awards was clearly the wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
And as I was, my company was gently tacking towards doing projects that made a difference, what we'd now call purpose-driven and what have you. And the more, as we gently tacked, the more I realised that I needed to be clearer about the strategy behind the project. We needed to help people write down where they wanted to put themselves. I suppose the planning function from the advertising perspective. That we needed to sharpen up, really. And all of the marketing things I'd learned about 20 years ago started to come back. And we start to transition out of being a graphic design company that won lots of awards, or quite a lot of awards, into a brand consultancy. So that's when the transition starts to happen. And I guess the company starts to grow up a bit. And it becomes less about, is this an amazing piece of work that no one's seen before? And more about, well, that's an interesting client. What can we do for them? Being much less about, the weird fixation with, awards and things like that.
Yeah, it probably happens the same period. After you win a few, you think it would be good if we could help this company improve.
Yes.
It sounds such a radical thing, but it's sort of true. And I think if you don't win a few, you're probably forever chasing them. But if you win a few, you think it's far more interesting to try and think, well, they're this size or they've got this many customers. How do you improve that?
Yeah.
Becomes a bigger challenge than can we win an award? Yeah,
and there's still tons and tons of designers out there whose first thought on a project is, well, very good designers think, well, can I win an award with this? And it's like, and I'm now think that's just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. Really, my thought is, can we do some excellent work?
Yeah,
in this
if it wins awards, brilliant, but not
for a client who's doing some amazing things. Yeah, and if people like it, then that's nice. But most of our most famous projects have not won significant awards. The correlation between Shelter didn't win D&AD.
What about, let's pick the most awarded, so the stamps.
Oh yeah,
gold
okay.
award.
Yeah, they did win. Yeah,
Yeah.
they won everything. Yeah,
It's pretty good.
yeah.
Gold.
But as one of my account directors once said to me, Michael, the thing about stamp projects is they only get stamp projects.
Do they?
Yeah.
Is there? I suppose so. It's such a niche thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
in
you don't go
retrospect?
into a boardroom for
Yeah.
a major charity and say, "Oh, we did these stamps." They go, "Who is this idiot?"
Good for you.
Yeah, good for you. Because that old line that might have worked in the 80s or the 90s about "we're really creative,"
Yeah.
it just doesn't fly anymore.
They want to see something that's relevant.
I mean,
to them.
a potential client wants to know that you are award worthy, I guess, but actually they don't really care.
I don't know whether awards don't seem. My impression is they matter a bit less now.
Yeah, I haven't showed my fruit and veg
Yeah.
stamps.
I've still got a wrapped copy of
Oh,
those.
yeah, keep hold
How
of
much
that.
were they worth now?
Oh, you know.
£12?
No, more than
15?
that. Yeah, if you got an unfranked one, where they missed the die cut, that's worth a lot of money.
Is it?
In
I'll have
case
a
you're
look.
interested.
I've got them in the little cellophane. You must have given them to me.
Yeah, most of it.
But,
But yeah, there's no correlation between. I think we tried the "we're creative" pitch for quite a while, and then slowly we started realising the noughties that it just didn't fly.
yeah.
Because clients want to know our kind of clients want to know, how are you going to do this project? And probably most importantly, have you done anything like this before for any clients like us? I think it's a little different to advertising in a way. I'm sure there are some agencies who specialise in blah and then ergo get more blah. Like they do sportswear and get more sportswear clients. In my world, getting that first type of project, whether it be a philanthropy project or a university or a big charity, it's very hard getting that first one.
But once you get one, you're in. Yeah.
Actually, once you've done 3, you're in.
Right. Really?
Yeah. That's the weird thing. Really. Well, I suppose if you do one really well, then eventually it gets. Anyway.
But I think if you've won a lot of awards, which you have, you've got the credibility to say it's not all about awards. It's about this.
Okay.
If you haven't won it, there used to be a few ad agencies that would say, we don't enter awards, we don't think they're very good. And you think, well, it's just as well because you wouldn't win any. Your work's not very good.
Yeah, maybe.
But,
I don't know, I'm definitely over that now. If it wins the thing,
So what do you think about, in terms of, I don't know whether we would be the right people to ask anymore about whether awards are valuable. It seems weird now because obviously the point is, I'm sure you would have been the same, is when these books would have been come out, it would be there'd be tons of stuff in there that you wouldn't have seen, and it was all in one place and you'd look and check it all out, whereas you're seeing it every single day now. So I don't know, if I was, when we went to that dinner the other week, if I was president, I'd be thinking, well, what is the role of awards today?
Yeah,
because it's not your chance to see the best stuff.
I think it's a fair question. I think that where I've ended up really is that I think I learned this trick from Paula Scher, who said that it's all very well, Michael, and you might think you've done a brilliant work, you had a brilliant year, what have you, but at the end of the day, just pick your best 3 projects and enter them, and don't worry about it. Yeah. I always thought that this rule, Paula's rule, the Paula principle, I call it, it's a pretty good rule.
Yeah.
You get, and let's face it, there are some years when you haven't even done 3 brilliant bits of work.
Yeah.
Years ago, I used to have this rule that you'd have to have a great idea every week, which would mean by the end of the year you had 52 brilliant
pieces of
and
work.
then I think then eventually I started to slightly temper that requirement. But we basically will get to the end of the year and we think, well, these 2 or 3 things are quite nice, and we'll enter then with a couple of things and then sort of forget about it. And if they win something nice, if they don't, they don't, and that's it.
Yeah.
It really is it. And also we are now not. We work in these strange sectors where you can't necessarily push through really, really weird out there work anymore. You're weird and out there are not performance criteria.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah. If you're trying to help an international undernutrition charity, If you can, we work across the world in 54 countries. You shouldn't go into the meeting thinking, well, this will win the war.
Yeah.
You should go into the meeting thinking, how can I solve their existential challenge that they're facing?
Absolutely. Well, and also you become aware of the types of work that wins awards, which is not necessarily a good thing. But there are certain things that you think that's probably winning an award, partly on the type of project it is, rather than the result.
Yeah, maybe. Although I think my judgment is definitely not as good as it was.
Yeah, no, I couldn't.
I fear.
I mean, it makes me wonder. We were talking a little bit earlier about judging things at this age and perhaps 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And when you're saying, you would think, part of me thinks that's quite reasonable, one brilliant idea a week. You think, well, all week, if you work really hard, surely you'd come up with one
You've got to think
really
of one.
good. I don't know about brilliant, but really good. But it doesn't sound that unreasonable. But then obviously, that doesn't seem to, 52 a year or whatever, it doesn't seem to happen. It seems so. I don't know what my question is. I suppose my question is, how do you compare you now to you then? Because obviously there's a lot of benefits of that slightly unreasonable guy thinking we need one brilliant idea every week.
Yeah.
Trying to go for that is helpful in itself. Recognising now that that's a bit weird.
Yeah.
Is that helpful? Is that good or bad? I mean, it feels true that you're unlikely to get to that. But is that sort of young guy who is slightly naive about those things, is there a benefit to that?
I think there is a benefit to that naivety of why can't you have a great idea every week? I think that, that what is true is that I'm, whatever I am, 58. How old are we?
58. We're 58.
Yeah. And
don't lump me in with your generation.
And I am still, filling my sketchbook
Yeah.
with ideas, like I did in a taxi cab after meeting with you 20 odd years ago, and I'm still doing that. I'm still designing stuff. I'm still, much to the chagrin of the designers, to be fair, because they probably wish I would be slightly a bit more laid back, but I can't really stop myself. Really, it's not. I'm hardwired to create ideas. Yeah, I can't stop.
I'm the same. I enjoy it. So, but what do you think you're better at, and what do you think you're worse at? Let's put it that way.
I think I do sometimes get a little bored with the execution. I think that's fair.
Of your stuff, what you think that's enough. You don't have to work through the night to
I think that,
diddle about.
I think I sometimes lose my patience with the end game. So I have learned that it's very useful if I've got designers working with me who are probably a bit more patient than me. And are willing to sort of go, we can make this work.
So is that what you're better at or what you're worse at? I'm trying to assess whether that's a good or bad thing.
I seem to have been, I can develop skills at kind of writing what we might now call narrative, finding ways to...
So you're better at that now?
You
should be.
Because I've been able to channel all that ad thing that we talked about into creating these positions for organisations. So, probably the best exposition of that is Dear World, Yours Cambridge, which is a fundraising project for Cambridge. Dear World, Yours Cambridge. The idea of writing a letter to the world
ad campaign
is an extraordinary thought. Yeah. But it's a fundraising project, and so that kind of thing, I've kind of developed the ability to do that with, to be fair, some very good writers who work with me on these kind of things. There's still that thing about creating the idea, the Jodrell Banks, if you like. Thinking of, and to be, the whole studio was trying to find a way to put type into a dish that emulated the turn of that famous radio telescope.
And did you do that on a Mac at the time? You probably did, didn't you? Because you were early Mac, but...
Jodrell? Jodrell's relatively recent.
How old is that?
It's last year.
Last year, right, okay.
This year. I'm already in next year. This year it came out.
Right.
All the sketches are in it, but then we have to try and find out how to do it.
Yeah.
So it's all very well having the idea, but how to put the words Jodrell Bank into a concave dish, then remove the dish, then turn it, and then chop out half the animation.
So was it all done in Mac? It wasn't, because obviously you could do it for real, shoot it. And...
I think knowing that we wanted to animate it, we had to do it.
Oh, okay.
We had to do it in, we had to do it in 3D programs, but turn off all the lighting.
Right.
All the effects that the 3D programs wanted to do.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I actually did it with my son.
Did you?
Yeah, he's trained to be an architect, and I said to him, we were away one weekend, I said, Joe, will you help me? I want to put this we tried it, putting this kind of curved type in a dish and then taking away the background, looked bonkers. And then the next day, poor chap, we were away for a weekend. And each day I would go, Joe, can I just try something else? Because I haven't been able to train myself to program in 3D. Okay, I can't do it. I don't seem to be able to do it anyway, but he can. And the next day I said, can we just try it with a big fat ring around it? And as soon as we put that in and start to turn it, we go, ooh, the kind of magic of that creation. And you're right, you could in theory have pushed some type into a dish and put it under a PMT camera, like in the pre-computer, but you wouldn't have been able to turn it.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose you could have turned the dish and done stop frame or something, but now, of course, you can do it. But it was particularly difficult to do, that one.
Yeah.
Looks like it just
looks
happened
cool.
like
Looks,
that.
well, it looks effortless. That's
looks
right.
effortless, yes. Yeah.
Which is what you want,
Yeah, to my point about timelessness.
Yeah.
If it can look like it had happened just in a second.
It's always the things that look like someone knocked it out quickly that last.
And that's probably, that's an idea that's landed. People love that logo, it seems. Which is great. It's lovely when that happens.
But that is funny because we were literally talking a second before that about the fact that you're less patient with the execution, and then we've gone straight into something where you kept pushing and pushing.
Well, I kept pushing someone else.
Yeah, that's true.
So my team, God, I drive them crazy when I'm just trying to get something right. So there's the end game of a logo design when you're drawing and drawing and drawing, trying to get the character or the kerning or the right curves on a symbol, because I've designed trillions of symbols, and then the worst bit of my job is when you don't take the end game seriously enough, and then you look at it 10 years later and go, oh shit, I should have, the logo stays in use for much longer than it should have, or something. And so I learned very early that if you really want the work to be timeless and you want something to last for a long time, ideally, then you've really got to be careful with that last bit,
But obviously, that last bit is so subjective, isn't it?
Yeah. To a point.
And this is something I was talking in the last discussion with Michael about, that lots of people won't recognise the difference between the ones you rejected and the ones you've approved.
Yes, that's true.
And I wonder how you sort of deal with that. That essentially that's your will wanting your way, as we all do.
Yeah.
Sometimes for things that you feel, but some people can't see.
Yes, it's true. 99.9% of people will not see the hours spent on kerning.
No, exactly.
A 9-word logotype, no. Or the why you redrew the T to fit the Y or
and
whatever.
I don't know where this is going or what the question is, but obviously that means to your life, you keep going, you stay up late, or you get your son to stay up late.
Yes.
But pushing on for something that a lot of people, it's an innate thing in you.
Yeah.
To do with your aesthetic taste and eye and all of those things. But they're sometimes so hard to sell or make people appreciate that detail.
Yeah, yes. Well, we'll just do it anyway. It drives my counter-item crazy.
Yeah.
How long have we spent on this, Michael? I went, well, we need to get it right. We might spend weeks drawing a piece of type. Yeah, I mean, it's bonkers. But that's the joy of having a small company, to be fair.
You can do that. Yeah.
You can do. I mean, we shouldn't do it. But, if I was a creative director of one of the big agencies, we'd have, a day to draw the logo, and 3 days to have the ideas. We'll give ourselves at least 3 weeks, ideally 5 weeks, to have the ideas. One of my team worked for me for 10 years, over 10 years, and then she got a job at one of the big name design agencies, and it was only then that she said, "My God, I had no idea. I had no idea I'd worked at an art collective for a decade."
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden she had 2.5 days to do the whole
effing
project,
Yeah.
Whereas before she'd had 2 months.
So what would you think if someone came in to try and buy your company and then you ran a big department? Would you think that would be good to have oversight on a much bigger thing, or do you think that would be a pain?
Well, I mean, once or twice a year we lose a project because we're not big enough.
Yeah.
And that you do ask
in what
yourself,
sense? What do they? Why why would you not be big enough? Because obviously you can scale up and accommodate any size project.
I think that's just a
mindset.
It's a mindset thing. Yeah. Because I can, a very, very large charity nearly appointed us recently, but didn't appointed a company with 108 people in it, not 8.
Of which 3 will be working on them.
Yeah, and you can say till you're blue in the face that we're not the pitch team, we're the people who are going to do it. And look, these 4 people in this room, from Johnson Banks will do
They're
the
on the
project.
phone. You can talk to them.
Yeah, but there's always once or twice a year we'll lose a project because of scale. And to your question, you do think, And I guess we're now, and we're sort of slightly in an arms race with some of the best branding agencies in the world now, whether we like it or not, really. And some of them have got just dozens, sometimes hundreds of people. That's tricky because there's 8 of us in a studio in Clapham. And so that's challenging. And there are moments where you think, wow, gosh, wouldn't it be great if I had a team of motion designers and a team of 3D animators, which some of these people do, obviously, because they have the scale.
Absolutely.
And a team of art workers who would kern the T and the Y for me for months, and I wouldn't have to worry about it. And yet the flip side of that is you then have to feed that animal. Yeah, and you wouldn't be able to spend 3 months kerning the Y and the T, and all of a sudden you'd have to take a project that you didn't really want to do, and because we only work for people doing good. We only work for impactful people. Yeah, we won't work for, we turn down projects once a month. Turned one down yesterday, because we think it's either going to be greenwash, and because we've done quite a lot of climate and environmental projects now, so we're starting to get people contacting us to try and make them look more environmentally friendly, and so my alarm bells are going. So yes, to your question, sometimes you think that, but then with the kind of work that we do, social impact, philanthropy, education, culture, at the end of the day, you can't get the fees up.
Although presumably over time, there's got to be more work going that way than anywhere else.
Over time,
growing.
Yeah,
that's the sort of growing area, I would have thought, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's slow. Yeah, I mean, we've been tacking towards 100% not-for-profit for a decade, and we're finally there. But it's taken a while, and we couldn't do it if we had 80 people.
Yeah,
we can with 8, so we can save the world, but we can't just save that much of it.
Yeah, I would imagine you'd be the perfect company to buy and backfit into someone else to run.
Yeah, and from their perspective, yes.
From them, yeah. It's not what you want to do, but
no.
I'm just thinking from their perspective.
I'm sure my wife would like it if I did that.
Yeah. So, a couple of last questions.
Yes.
Nearly there. So, I think I probably know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. So, on balance, does the computer improve the output of graphic design or harmed it? It's obviously both, but
on balance, it's definitely sped it up.
Yeah,
and I'm definitely able to do things now that I couldn't do. I think on balance, it's helped.
So I would imagine it's definitely helped you.
It's definitely helped me.
But in making it so easy to do for anyone.
Yes.
I don't know what the
democratization of it.
I mean, there must be companies now who don't go to you, but they say, we'll do it in-house. So-and-so can operate a computer. We know roughly what we want.
Well, I suppose the big branding projects that we now do, quite often there's someone in-house.
Yeah.
We've had clients whose design teams are bigger than us.
Right.
So that's a different skill, really. Yeah. Because what you're trying
Execution
to do.
rather than, or adaptation rather than.
Yeah, and you're trying to help them take a brand on and make it work, which is as important half the time as what the brand is.
Yeah.
So I think on balance it's helped, and it's pretty cool the fact that I've taught myself how to use Premiere, so it's pretty good that I can clip together a lot of clips and edit them and put it out and put something in social media within an hour.
Yeah.
I think that's great, actually. Imagine doing that before. Film was like, it's a nightmare.
Well, even a mock-up of an ad was hard to get hold of 30 years ago.
But I suppose I kind of threw myself into the computers, and over 30 years ago. So I've been. I wouldn't say I was a digital native because I was clear. I did have to artwork my logos years ago. I remember being in Australia and sweat pouring off me down onto the drawing board and ruining the logo I was designing. Anyway, but no, I think I'm balanced and I'm positive. There are moments where you sort of think, And we're in a moment actually with branding design where everything looks the same.
Yeah, what is happening there? You obviously you've seen the what would you call that meme or whatever it is going around where it's all the old logos, the Burberrys and then all the new ones, and they're virtually they're all set in Gotham or Helvetica or something. That what's the story there? Because obviously isn't the goal that you of design and advertising is to create a personality that's bespoke and unique. Yeah, for the person you represented. You would have thought.
You would have thought.
Why have they all ended up the same now?
I don't know. There's a real herd. There's a sheep-like mentality in lots of the different market sectors. So the digital sector. Someone who went first. When Apple dumped its serif typeface, stopped using Garamond, and Google dumped theirs, and Microsoft went to sans serif. So all of the tech companies, bit by bit, went sans serif.
Yeah.
And all look the same. Well, we were working with Duolingo a few years ago, and they wanted to keep their mascot, their little owl, and the first design meeting was about, well, can we just have a bit of sans serif type, like kind of a bit like all the others? And I said, well, okay, well, here's the thing, but that doesn't differentiate you at all. So we had exactly this discussion with a tech client whose default setting was, well, why can't we just do that?
Yeah.
And we're saying, well, then you missed a trick there because you're a very unique, the world's most loved language learning app.
Yeah.
And you're going to make yourself look like. But we were prepared to have that conversation and prepared to probably imperil the project by having that conversation. Other people may not have been that strong and might have gone, oh, okay, you want set in brown or circular upper and lower case. Well, we can do that, yeah, because that's what Airbnb did.
Yeah.
Airbnb tipped a lot of people into that. So that pushed the whole sector to look the same. And the same company did the Premier League, which had a big effect on sports brands. And then all the fashion brands started moving to the same. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
It's strange, isn't it? Part of me feels... I've had lots of those conversations where you like the Duolingo. And part of me feels like an idiot. That, there's the sort of financial side where you think, can't we just give them Gotham, move it on, cash in the money and do something else?
Which would have been an easy
Which
thing
is
to say.
easy to do.
Easy to do.
You make more money, you have less stress, less arguments.
Yeah.
But you can't, can you?
You
You find yourself trying to make, pushing against the tide when you think, well, we can lose this.
Yeah.
Rather than accepting the money and then being happy.
Yeah,
it's an odd thing, isn't it?
Yeah, so 3 weeks later, I'm walking across Clapham Common to work I live on one side of the common and walk on the other, and work on the other side. And I'm walking to work, and I'm thinking, this funny little mascot that Duolingo have, and I'm thinking, wouldn't it be funny walking to work, having had this idea? Wouldn't it be funny if we drew the Duolingo word in as though we'd taken a bit of the symbol and then created the type out of the symbol?
Right.
And most of the designers look at me like an utter idiot. One of the designers, Lara, goes, that's an interesting idea. She's got a great feel for type. So she starts doing these experiments, and we look at them, and they look utterly bonkers. Sort of taking the ear of this funny-looking bird and created some type out of it. And the first experiments look kind of dreadful, but interesting. And then we fly to Pittsburgh, where they're based, in theory, to cover a room with 7 or 8 routes. We're really going for it, like Martin Lambinet presenting to Channel 4. Cover the room, the old cover the room trick, and we're thinking, okay, we're there for a week. We're thinking, okay, they're going to like 2 or 3, and we'll do a bit of development, and then on a Thursday we'll do it again. Everyone goes, this is great, with the type made out of the bird, made out of a wing, which is a bonkers idea. And yet, lo and behold, they get their own typeface, they get their own uniqueness, and they stand out from the other tech people. And it's a weird thing. I mean, I tried really, really hard to stop it happening, but we are in a period.
Yeah.
A bit like, do you remember when Photoshop introduced the blur filter?
Yeah.
Well, I remember at the time thinking, oh, this is cool. And I remember thinking, oh, hang on. everyone's going to look back at this time and think, that's
yeah.
when the blur filter came
That
into
week
Photoshop.
that
week,
came out, yeah.
And when you were talking about David Carson and Tomato,
Yeah,
early Why Nots, that was the period.
yeah.
And so we are in a period which we will look back on
And think that was strange. Yeah.
We're in this kind of quasi-modernist, but not really modernist. It's sort of like Gridnick-y kind of modernist in branding anyway, where these ultra-simplified logos and sans serif type and very bright neon colours, and then we'll go. As long as it moves,
but you almost can't present a serif font now without being led out of the room. Can you?
It's quite tricky. Yeah. I mean, or you have to. When we've done it in the past, we've had to create these quite long documents saying, no, the tide is turning. Look,
we are modern.
Honestly. Yeah, we are. You are modern. Look, so and so has used this typeface, and then you scrabble around and try and find another. Yeah, it's quite tricky trying to persuade people to not follow. It takes a bit of work. That yes, yeah.
Well, I think Garamond is proven to be the most readable face.
Is it?
In the research I've done, by quite a long way, weirdly.
Yeah.
So there's all those little things you reach for now and again.
Trying to get Garamond through now is pretty hard.
Yeah, exactly. I can't imagine anyone would Garamond. But what about things like? So I love the Science Museum stuff.
Oh.
And that's a very out there.
That was quite an out there idea.
Face. But being that I'm someone who would try and sell Garamond. I kind of thinking, well, that's so unique and distinctive and unusual, and not like. Surely people would say, "Can we have something equally distinctive and unique, but for us, like you did for the Science Museum?"
Yeah,
has that ever happened, or?
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. And I think people come to Johnson Banks for two things, really. This is what they say. Two or three things. One, they say we like the way you think. Yeah. Two, they say it's interesting the way you use words. We hear that a lot. And the other thing that seems to land is that we're trying really hard to make each project different from the last.
Yeah.
So it's very rare that someone sits in our studio and goes, "Can you do something like that for us?" Really rare. Which I think must happen quite a lot at some studios that are led by their design style. I'm not naming any names here, but we know who we mean. And there are lots of people who've built a portfolio that is of a similar ilk and will attract more work because people like the look of it. We're much more interested in people who like the idea
bespoke
of
solutions,
thinking differently, and bespoke. And that's generally what we get, actually. I don't think it's pretty rare that someone would say, "Oh, no, we came to you because we wanted, Helvetica Roman." Or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I suppose I was just wondering, not so much that they would want something that looked like the Science Museum, but they would want something as distinctively them as that was for the Science Museum.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I mean, of course, in the end, the Science Museum dumped it because it was too distinct. It was too weird.
They've dumped that, have they?
Yeah, because the Science Museum group decided they wanted all the different museums in the group to have a consistent feel, and also the new director of the museum. I found out after a couple of years after we designed it, hated it. So this new director came in just as it had been accepted, and then sort of spent the next decade trying to kill it. Yeah, which is it happens. It's a shame though, but that idea of the ligature of the I and the E, and then me and the designer Kat, who worked on it with me, and Frida Sack, who's sadly no longer with us, kind of got her on board to help me with the typography for that. We wanted that kind of modular, almost code-like. So you almost had to unlock the code of the symbol. Yeah. Which I would have thought
that would be one of those things, whereas with lots of new identities, they're sort of really loved in the beginning and then they tail off. I would have thought that would get more loved as it went.
Oh, it did. There was a huge furore when they dumped it. And I got so many emails when Shelter changed their logo last year. Just a barrage of emails from people complaining about it. But, it happens. Shelter lasted for 18 years.
Yeah.
Which is quite a long time. We did the More Than logo 22 years ago.
Yeah.
That nearly didn't happen at all. And so, when I started doing what I do, I used to aim for 20 years. And then that quickly got adjusted downwards.
Yeah, that seems, again, like something a young person would think. 20 years.
Yeah, then I pulled it down to 15, and then it got down to 10. And then, fairly recently, one managed one's expectations of the length of a new brand down to 5. and then it would get reviewed at 5, and then you didn't know. But the thing that's happened in my world is that, and I don't think this is happening in advertising, to be fair, but in my world, branding has become quite tactical. So now that branding has become so powerful, and the tentacles of branding now reach into so many things, across advertising, film, TV, digital, environmental, typography, photography, and we put ourselves at the middle of this hub, and the spokes go out like this, and there's bloody millions of spokes now, and we add more spokes every year, to be honest. So because this is so powerful, and now organisations realise that, then some people will go, okay, we're going to do this, and that's going to be powerful for us for 5 years, and then we're going to tack again. And so, whereas years ago, when it was still known as corporate identity, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
You designed the logo to stay forever.
Yeah.
Now people are prepared to change them. And that's probably because of the power of what these things do. It's amazing what branding can do.
Well, I guess also a lot of it isn't printed. What percentage of your output is printed stuff now?
It's so low.
Yeah.
It's
10%? 20%?
Less than that.
Is it less than that?
It's less than
somebody
that.
else said that the other day.
Yeah, I think I spent the whole of the 90s designing posters for people, doing logos and posters. I would get into cabs and they say, "What do you do?" And I'd go, my stock answer were, I do logos, posters, and stamps.
Right.
And the cabbie would go, "Oh, I see," and that was it. They knew. Now, it's like, I struggle a bit to explain what I do to people. But printed, no, it's really low. It's a drag, really, because boil me down and I design a logo or a poster. Yeah, in my old portfolio, I'm kind of tracking the work because it's our 30 years anniversary actually, and I've been tracking all of this work, some of which in that PDF I sent you.
Yeah.
And gosh, so much of it is portrait format. Yeah. Like a proper poster, 3:2 or A1 stuff.
Or letterhead.
Yeah, or a letterhead. And of course, none of that fits with a 16:9 widescreen anything anymore. Spend my whole time reformatting things.
Do you?
Yeah. Well, if you want, because portrait the world isn't portrait anymore.
No.
Yeah. The world's landscape. Yeah, or even widescreen, or square.
Yeah.
Weird. Your first half of your, first 20 years of your working career was based on portrait.
Yeah, it's awkward, isn't it?
Yeah.
So do you have the issue? Do you show two on the same screen?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of tricky.
So I've got two last questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Then we're done. So what design book do you thumb through the most? Do you reach for the most?
Wow, that's a good question. I know in the past there's a beautiful book on Tibor Coleman.
Yeah,
that Michael Beirut.
The squarish
one with Michael Beirut and Peter. I've forgotten the name of the guy who wrote it. That was a kind of Bible for quite a while. Love that book. Still love that work by the M&Co work, Tibor Coleman. And
he was a sort of in that Carson-y sort of thing where he felt like he sort of threw out the rules of it, but I could appreciate it and love it rather than think that's interesting.
And also Tibor, as I understood it, I now know a lot of people who worked with him, and he had that. And there's that adage about you can judge a design company by the people that work for it, and a whole series of amazing people went through that studio. Alexander Isley, Stephen Doyle, Stefan Sagmeister, Emily Oberman. That's just 4, and they'd probably another 14. And so I don't look at it as much as I did, maybe because I don't really get the chance to do that witty work as much as I used to. Design book now, that's interesting. It's very eclectic. It's not so much design actually. I'm much more likely to be looking at photography, architecture, art, reading. I think I've maybe at the moment I've kind of read so much on graphic design for 30 years. I've sort of stopped a little bit. Although I still catch myself reading up on the kind of Swiss classics, reading about Muller Brockmann and Armin Hoffman and people like that. Yeah,
interesting.
I kind of do love that kind of stuff.
Well, I think also I remember reading, I think Paul Arden used to say, you should not look at advertising books, you should go out to the cinema and you should look at things. And I used to say, how does that work then? If you look at an architectural thing and obviously after a while, you do exactly that. You get so sick of looking at sort of design that you can find stimulus in other places and know how to use it after a while.
Yeah, I call it sponge theory. You just
Sponge theory.
You sponge from everywhere and
absolutely,
anywhere.
yeah.
And actually, possibly the worst thing you can do, I mean, this doesn't apply to students, of course, but the worst thing you could do is look at graphic design all the time, because inevitably you end up finding the work kind of seeping out in your work.
Yeah.
And actually, in my world now, that's quite dangerous, because increasingly clients will send you a contract that says that we have to take the clause out every time. Their standard contract says you guarantee that what you design for us will not infringe anyone's copyright. This is a standard clause now.
How do you check everyone's work in the world?
But we regularly have to get down to the last 2 or 3 design routes, and we will have to trademark check them before it goes through. Yeah. Because what you don't want to do, for the client's sake and our sake, is for something to get out into the wider world, and it to look too close to something. That is an utter nightmare in my world when that happens. So we'll do everything in our power to avoid that. Because even with the best will of the world, you could say, well, we didn't see it, or I'm sorry, we didn't see that theatre company in Guadeloupe who've got a symbol
that seems so
like.
hard to do. There's so much stuff that I could say, oh, that was based on this was based on that.
We spend tons of our time now trademark checking.
Wow.
It's a nightmare. Yeah. But when you find something that no one has done, it is possible.
Yeah.
And it goes through trademark checks. You sort of think, wow, that's cool.
And when you've got to keep up your 52 brilliant ideas a year, it's tough.
It's very
tough.
It's very tough, my life. Yes.
So one last question.
Yes.
So what was the last thing you saw that you wished you'd done?
That's a good question. The last thing I saw that I wished I'd done. In design.
Anything, really. Just that you think. In the same way that when we were talking about the 94 pencils cover, where you think, it's the perfect answer. That's annoying. He's done that.
That's
I
annoying.
Can't have
He's
that.
done that. I can name quite a lot of photos.
Okay.
I've got quite slightly obsessed with photography.
Have you?
Yeah.
Like who? Who do you like?
You name it. I had to build a whole wall of shelves recently for all the photography books. I've become as obsessed with photography as I was about graphic design.
Really? And do you take many pictures?
Yeah. Well, what happened was that when I wrote my second book, the red one, the branding book, I got an advance from Thames and Hudson, quite an okay advance, not a massive advance, but not hundreds, thousands, but not tens.
Yeah.
Okay. So an amount. I spent it all on a good camera.
Right.
Because I'd sort of been kind of promising myself that one day I'd been that guy that got all these little digital this, digital that, Fuji this, Fuji that, and I would break them and drop them. And so I bought myself a really nice camera, and about 7 years ago, and I've been shooting constantly ever since. I've been really shooting, a lot, and now I've got 3 or 4 really nice cameras, which is great because you kind of use them and you really use them, and so I've now got kind of utterly obsessed with certain styles of photography.
So go on, name some photographers who you like.
I mean, I love street photography, so the classics like your Winograms and your Robert Franks.
Saul Leiter, do you like him?
So I do like a bit of lighter. I'm more of a black and white photographer.
Oh, okay.
But a lighter, I saw a Ernst Haas exhibition in Vienna at the weekend, which was
Did you? Yeah, he's
beautiful
brilliant,
colour stuff.
Yeah.
So that early colour is great.
He's amazing, yeah.
So Meyerowitz, I really like. But I really, at the end of the day, I love that black and white, that kind of Cartier-Bresson.
Yeah.
I also love Marielle Mark. I could talk about this. But so I love that kind of thing, and it's more likely to be a photograph that I'll think, oh, that's good. How do they get that? How do they do that?
Yeah.
Because I really love street photography, but you got to have such balls to do that.
It's hard to do now, isn't it? Street photography, because you can't take, now and again I might see a kid with a balloon, say, and it's if you get your camera out and take a picture of someone else's kid, it's a problematic thing. Or if you take a picture of 2 girls walking down, it's
you've got to be careful.
I think was it Cartier-Bresson who would hold it there and look the other way and take pictures.
Oh, I train myself to do that.
Have you? Yeah, I do that occasionally, but it's a problem if you get caught.
Well, if you're trying to observe the world, it's a weird place now because in terms of rights, and I've been chased twice.
Have you? By someone you've taken a picture of?
Yeah. Oh, I'm really into it. I'm sort of gathering them together because I'm thinking about a book, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm thinking about lots of books. I'm in the foothills of several books, but I'm really avoiding your question, aren't I?
No, you've named a few. You've named it. It's only to throw out
I can
a few
never
names.
say his name. Cortez.
Cortez. I say Cortez. I don't know if that's right, but yeah.
I saw a picture
Andre
this morning by Andre Cortez. That was, and I looked at that this morning. I thought, oh, that's good. Fuck, that's good.
What was that?
It's a really beautiful picture of sort of looking outwards towards it's kind of like a seascape.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of frosted glass in the left third of the photograph. And there's someone behind the frosted glass. And he'd shot it in this beautiful way that he'd obviously sat there and waited and waited and waited. And so there's this shadowy figure behind the frosted glass, and there's this amazing vista behind it. It's just beautiful.
Brilliant. I'll have a look for that.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
Excellent.
Really.
Well, you've answered that.
Yes, not with design, but with photography.
You're free to go. Thanks for doing that. That was excellent. Thank you. Thanks for
Well,
coming in.
I hope that I hope that wasn't too bad.
That was excellent.